Good morning, Southern California.
Is it? Good morning.
All right, we can barely hear you. It must be all the smoke. All right, welcome to the last ELTAC meeting of 2017, I hope. We will start out with call to order and roll call, and a reminder for anybody who's got cell phones to put them on vibrate or mute, which includes me. So going around the table, we'll start in Northern California and then go to Southern California. Andy Eaton, Eurofins Eaton Analytical.
Anthony Gonzalez, California Association of Public Health Lab Directors.
Stephen Clark, Pacific Eco Risk.
Mindy Boley, City of Ackville.
Mark Cookmore, Central Marin Sanitation Agency.
Rich Gossett, Visus Labs.
Bruce Burton, State Board Division of Drinking Water.
Renee Spears, State Water Board.
Gail Cho, Gail Cho, California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Diane Anderson, Apple Laboratories.
Bruce Godfrey with the Montrose Environmental Group.
Jacob Oaxaca with ELAP.
Christine Sotelo, ELAP.
Okay, going to Southern California.
Puido, Los Angeles County Sanitation District.
Miriam DeBoer, Metropolitan Water District of Southern California.
David Kimbrough, Pasadena Water and Power.
Melissa Hill, Orange County Water District.
Thomas Fukuman, Kempro Laboratory in Gardena.
Cindy Zernicki, Helix Water District. Maria Friedman, ELAP.
You guys are gonna have to say when you're done.
Done.
Okay, all right, so we'll go around to others in the room here, since you just did that down in Southern California.
Oh, hi. I am Betsy Lichty with the Division of Drinking Water, supervisor of our new quality assurance section. And I am responsible for overseeing all of our data intake, data reporting functions. So Jim Scousey, I know has presented to you before and has now retired. His CIDWIS unit is under me, and we are on a path to re-envisioning all of our data systems and data intake. So glad to be here.
I'm Kim Niemeyer. I'm with the State Water Board's Office of Chief Counsel.
Mary Pazraifat with CDFA Center for Analytical Chemistry.
Caitlin McCarthy, ELAP, and I just wanted to, if I could take just a moment, just to clarify that we're missing 3 voting members. Jill is sick, but I know she's watching. Ron Koss and Allison McKenzie is not here today. And also just take a moment to welcome Diane to the committee. This is her first meeting with ELTAC. We're really happy to have you, and she gave just a great interview, very impressive. So thank you for your interest.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Steve Weisberg with the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project.
Hélène Darriveau, State Water Board, Division of Drinking Water, Regulatory Development Unit.
Eric Nicolino, Division of Drinking Water, also with the Regulatory.
Jonathan Young, California Municipal Utilities Association.
Robert Brown with Division Drinking Water.
All right, thank you all, and I'll extend my welcome to you also, Diane. You've done a great job on the fee work group, so I'm confident you're going to be a great member here also. We're just setting the bar high. So, all right, next item on the agenda would be public comments for anything not on the agenda. So, any comments from folks up here? Anything from Southern California?
I don't think so.
All right, hearing nothing, we will move on to the approval of our minutes from July. The summary of the minutes was in the packet. I'm assuming everybody's had time to read those? Are there any corrections to the minutes? And Kate had also sent them out as draft notes about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So,
Nice and brief.
can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Second? So moved.
All right. Second to,
I think Rich seconded, I moved
okay.
it.
All right. The minutes stand approved. So, our next item would actually be the vote for the new ELTAC chairperson, since my term ends. As Kate mentioned, there are 3 people who are actually missing today. And since the chairperson is representing for all of ELTAC, there's been some discussion over whether we could perhaps end up doing the vote as an electronic vote to let those people have the ability to weigh in, but that requires a vote of ELTAC, so.
And we can collect these ballots today and just, if the committee chooses to allow that, the absent members to vote, I can contact them and get their vote via email.
Kevin, are we allowed to
Right, so.
No, I'm sorry, it's just the voting members.
Point of order here. How is this addressed in the rules, in the bylaws?
There's nothing specific about electronic or non-electronic voting.
All right, so any discussion about whether to allow the 3 missing people to vote electronically?
David here. I think we have a quorum. Let's just vote now.
I agree.
Comments from up here?
I agree.
I agree.
Okay, I think I hear a consensus that we just vote with people who are in attendance. So with that, I'll ask people to go ahead and mark their ballots and then turn them into Kate.
And if you're in Southern California, Maria should have the ballots and an envelope to collect your votes as well.
Sorry.
May or may not. There's something different.
All right, ready to move on to the next item of business, which is Christine's report.
Okay, so thank you, Andy. So hello, everybody. Can you hear me? It's really nice to see all of you here today. I'm just so happy to see your smiling faces. I know that all of you probably heard that I was out on extended leave, and it was for almost a life-threatening illness. So I'm really, really glad to be back here. So for my report out today, I want to cover 2 things. First, I want to kind of fill you in, since you all are my colleagues and we work together. I think you should know what happened and where I stand. And then second, when something like this happens, you have the beauty of gaining perspective. So I want to cover those 2 things. So on August 18th, I had a hemorrhaged aneurysm and I was rushed to the hospital. And I underwent what they call interventional surgery to save my life, stop the bleeding, and keep me from dying. So I'm really grateful to be here. I was in ICU for about 2 weeks, and then I went home and I recovered for 2 months. at home, which was awesome. I was the queen. Anything I wanted, I got. So if you could follow that suit, that would be great. But I am the 5% that survive. And I hear the sad stories of those that don't survive and those that don't come out the other side back to full health. And so I'm really grateful to be here. And I'm especially grateful to 4 people in this room that saved my life and acted so quickly, and didn't think it was just a headache and didn't think I was just tired and overworked. They immediately sprung into action. And so that's Jacob, Kate, Kim, and Marianne. And so I'm forever grateful for them for saving my life. In the words of Arnold Schwarzenegger, I'm going to maybe change his tagline and say, I'm back. I'm back to full health. I'm back to full time. And it's just really nice to be back here working with all of you. Second, I was saying earlier that the beauty of this is gaining perspective. So I've had a lot of time to think about what's important in life and what I want to do. And I still enjoy working at the board. I love the board. I've worked here for almost 18 years. I love the people I work with, the work that we do to protect public health and the environment. And I even enjoy working with you all. It's fulfilling. We don't agree with each other. You don't even agree with each other when you vote. So, of course, I'm not going to agree with you. And so we're going to have those days where we're going to leave this room and say, darn it, I didn't get what I wanted. But you have your perspectives and you have your drivers and I have my charge. But we're working together. And I think that's the beauty of it, is that we all have the common goal of ELAP's mission. The common good that we all want is for ELAP to be better, because we all know that ELAP was broken. It needed to be fixed. And so we're all working together and moving forward. So I'm just happy that I'm here and that we are working together. And a testament to all of this hard work and all of us working together is that yesterday at the board meeting, we received an award. It's the prestigious Sustained Superior Accomplishment Award. And I'm just, feeling really good, and I'm hoping that this meeting really just turns out well. So that is a good segue to kind of reflecting on this year. So it's December, and I've gained all this perspective, and I'd like to just kind of go over what we've done, and we've done a lot. And as I said, the testament is that award that we received last year, and it's really from all the work that you helped us do over the last 3 years. So here it is. It's pretty big deal. We finished the expert review panel. We're still working on our internal management system. We have that training contract. Maybe some of you have already received the assessment training and the gap analysis assessments. We're monitoring our proficiency testing unit and the samples that reports that we received. And we've mended the relationship between ELTAC and ELAB. And we're still working on a communication. So it's a big deal. We've done a lot. So you all should be very proud, and I thank you for all of that. We just threw in some information about the panel. That was a big deal, and you all know that completed in January. And it was really our roadmap to improve, and we're still on that path forward in that roadmap to improve. This internal management system that we have, you all know that we voluntarily have been implementing it, and I have to tell you, it is why this program stayed afloat. I've mentioned before that systems like this and in your laboratory, they're parallel. We have the same management quality system requirements that you do. And I've said before that if somebody exits and wins the lottery or gets hit by the bus, they know what to do. And these folks here in the room, Jacob, Marianne, Kate, Kim, all of the staff knew exactly what to do. They had an SOP when I left, and they knew how to keep the boat afloat. So I really believe in this. Our training and assessment contract is happening. They are doing the assessments out there. And I'd really love to hear your feedback on how they're going. And they're being implemented the way that we envisioned it to be. We're still chipping away at reviewing proficiency testing. We still have kind of a high number of those that are submitting late, and some that are not passing. The philosophy for ELAP is to work with the labs, and I've said that before. So if they forget to submit it, we tell them, okay, we'll wait. Or if they fail, we'll say, okay, we'll wait to see if you pass it. But, you know, we're still sticking to our guns that we won't accredit you if you haven't passed your proficiency testing sample. And then our relationships with you all on ELTAC are so much better than they were before. So I want to, you know, thank you for working with us and sticking to this committee. And how many meetings did we have, Andy? 8?
8 the first year.
Yeah. So that's a lot.
I got
That's a
A-list
huge
based on
commitment.
this.
And I just wanted to throw up what you all have accomplished. That is a great deal. So you should be very proud of yourself looking back at this year and over the last 3 years on what you've done for ELAP and the lab community. Our communications is still improving, but I hope that you all can see that it is definitely night and day from where it was before ELAP moved over from public health. But there's still a lot to do. We haven't gotten our PT database, our revamped database for our certificates. We're still chipping away at our backlog on assessments. And then our regulations are still not adopted. And I'll talk more about that later in the program updates. And just here's a slide regarding the technology. As I mentioned, the PTs and our application database are still in the works. But we're making progress, so that's good. I mentioned the assessments. I hope to get rid of the backlog for assessments by the end of 2018 for drinking water. So I think that's a really good goal that we're going to meet by the end of 2018. And so some program updates that you should know about. We have a new staff member, Ali Hussein, reports to Maria Friedman. She's from the Glendale office, and he has a background in biology, and he has a lot of inspection experience. So he'll go through ELAP's training SOP, he'll go through the NV5 training, he'll make sure he passes the tests and all of this, you know, officer exams that he needs to pass before he goes out and assesses the lab and meets our standards. So we're really happy to have found someone after many, many months of soliciting staff to come work for us. And then, sad news for us, but awesome news for Marianne. She got a promotion at Food and Agriculture. She's here today, so if you want to congratulate her. She'll be overseeing Food and Ag's Environmental Safety Laboratory. And she was mentioning yesterday that you run about 35 methods in that lab. So that's exciting for her. So
is that lab ELAP certified?
I was going to say.
it might be.
Maybe.
So I told her be patient with us. And then we recently, this was a really great welcoming committee for me when I got back. The week after I got back, we were audited by US EPA. It was already scheduled. But the feedback is, we haven't had our exit conference, but the feedback is pretty good. I can say without question that they gave us a lot of accolades for our documentation and how it's improved. So hopefully we'll see that in the report. And you all know that we're working on the MUR methods update. We sent out a news virus update on that. So if you have any questions, we can talk about that more. Let's see. And then we're still working on our early implementation contract. You all know what that is, and if you don't, it was something that was born out of the workshop with the board, and we had some presenters wanting to have some sort of pilot project. And so initially we told you there would be 6 laboratories that would participate, but because of a lack of funding, we will only have 2. But it's still a great idea. When the contract is approved, we will solicit 2 laboratories to participate. And they will have a consultant work with them to be TNI compliant within a year. And there is a component that if you're chosen, you will help your fellow laboratories, a kind of a pay it forward component. Answer questions, maybe go out on a roadshow, and answer any questions that your colleagues in the lab community have about implementing TNI, because you've been through it, you've had the expert help you, hold your hand, you've developed the documents, and so, you know, this is a great contract, and I hope we can get that going by the beginning of this year. And we're still working on the small lab contract. If you recall at the board workshop, what we wanted to do was have multiple workshops throughout the state and allow labs to walk in, learn about TNI, and walk out with the templates and the knowledge they need to be successful. So we're still working on that, and that's moving forward. And then in your packet, we have Assembly Bill 1438, which was the cleanup bill that was passed and signed by the governor. And there's a lot of old references to public health. As you can see in your packet, it strikes that out, it changes it to the board. There wasn't an appeals process for if we took any action against you, and the appeals process is exactly the same as it is for all the programs in the board. So it's nothing different, it's just we wanted to be consistent with the board's processes. There are nothing additional. The essence of a cleanup bill is that you're just cleaning it up. You're not adding anything. Anything added or different would be in our regulations update that we'll talk about later. And that goes into effect January 1st, 2018. And so what you all have been waiting for, the regulations update, which is one slide, we would have hoped for it to be the actual draft of the text. And we postponed our meeting till December so that we could have that for you. But because of the issues that have happened, and also leaving having one of our, integral staff working on the regulations leave and accept a promotion, we're going to have to extend the regulations timeline. It's a lot of work, and we have one person down, and so I'll have to announce the position, hire the person. So at this point, we're hoping that we could have a draft out mid-year, maybe in the fall. But those are all speculative, timeline dates. It just depends on when I can backfill the position. But as it says on this slide, your role remains the same. We will definitely get your feedback on the regulations and what your thoughts are, and try to incorporate it. As far as the comments on the preliminary draft that we received when we posted it, and then the comments we received at the workshops, you'll be happy to know that about 85% of your comments were really good, and we made the changes in the new draft of the regulations that we'll release. That's the beauty of those workshops, is that we get to talk to you, you get to express your ideas, and you get to give us your thoughts on how to make the regulations better. So that's a pretty, good number, approximately 85%. And then the rest, they're policy decisions that we have to speak internally with our executive management and maybe even the board. But we want to thank you for going to those meetings. They were long, and for taking the time to submit your comments and send them to us. One example of one of those policy decisions that we have already made and that we've spoke with our state agency partners committee is the requirement for the quarterly reporting. So if you recall, that is if you decide not to implement TNI and be an early adopter, to give the agency partners some confidence in implementation of the standards or the quality of your laboratory for their regulatory decision making, we added a quarterly reporting requirement. And a lot of folks didn't like that. And we talked to the agency partners, and they would like us to, they proposed for us to adjust it to a one every year annual report. So it's what you would do in your internal audit of your laboratory every year and report out on any corrective actions, any nonconformities, anything that you've done, so that we know what has been happening in your laboratory through your internal audit. And the agency partners are here today, so you might ask them questions if you like. And I'm gonna pitch it over to Jacob to talk about field
Before we
accreditation.
just jump to, since we've gone through 2 agenda items without any
okay.
opportunity for people to ask questions.
Oh, I thought it was just smooth transition to
That's because,
Jacob.
once again, you thought you were in charge. Any questions, first from Northern California for either Jalapa report or regulations? Mindy, then Steve.
Go ahead.
All right, Steve, then
Well,
Mindy.
maybe, this is Stephen, maybe a process issue first. I believe there were a couple people from the public in Southern California, and I don't think you asked if there were any public comments.
You did. Yeah.
I did? I missed it. Okay, thank you.
Right back in the beginning.
Okay, then I do have a couple of, actually a number of questions.
Yeah.
So the PT process, the laboratories get, in regards to late and not, and getting not acceptable result and then not meeting the reporting timeline. The PTs are available quite early in the year compared to when they're due. So can you elaborate a little bit on what the justifications are for why people are late? And even with the prospect of failing a PT, a not acceptable result, laboratories should be planning for that possibility and the opportunity to get a new standard in and reanalyze. So what is, frankly, the excuse that laboratories are using for why they didn't know about the deadline, couldn't meet the deadline?
I can give one reason on that.
Yeah, so just a little education on my
Well, I think
end.
you answered the question there. I think a lot of it is poor planning. Chris Ryan is not here today, but he sees every single one of those, he hears every one of those excuses, and a lot of the times it's just poor planning, that they didn't order it, they ordered the sample late, and we end up putting their application on hold because they don't have it. And if they fail, then we work with them and we tell them we'll just put it aside, and once you pass, we'll accredit you. I think if you maybe examine the reason, some of them have said that they just didn't know. And we accept that, and we're working on our communications. I don't know, and maybe you all can help us identify how to communicate that to them more clearly. But many of them say that as well, that they just didn't know, and you were not requiring us to do this previously. Yeah.
I think that's the biggest one that I've heard with people that have brought it to my attention is that PTs that were acceptable, whether they were doing a WS, but it's for a receiving stream, so it could be classified as either a wastewater or a drinking water, and now the PT group is coming in and saying the one they've done for 10 years that has been acceptable for this FOT and passing is no longer good. And so that's the big one that they're having, is that they're being told, wait, no, you were supposed to do a separate one for this and this, that can't count. And so that's the biggest holdup that I have heard from labs. And just even the communication is that they'll be told this isn't good enough, and they say, well, what do I need to do? And then there is a long delay. I mean, I had an email I printed out and forgot to bring it this morning, that's a 3-page countdown of going back and forth for 3 months of a lab trying to satisfy the needs to meet the PT, but they're not getting what they feel are straight answers as to what exactly is needed. And so I can forward it over to you, because that's something that, I mean, I know that you guys are trying to work with, trying to clear up, but there are still some issues in there where things are taking a little bit longer, and then they're not getting what they think is a straight answer as to what's really needed. So
David down here, if I could jump in at this point.
Go ahead.
I had brought this issue up at the last ELTAC meeting. In a lot of cases, it's not that the labs aren't doing PT samples, it's that they're doing WS and WP and being told that one or the other is not allowable. And on the issue that this raises, though, is that if you read ELAP's regulations, WS and WP aren't mentioned. Nowhere does it say you have to use WS for field testing 1 through 5 and WP for 12 through 17 or whatever the appropriate numbers are. So the problem isn't so much that they're not doing it as there's basically been a change in the rules that aren't based in regulation.
So, yes, I recall that meeting that we had, and I would definitely like to work with those laboratories that are confused. But for every line item, labs are required to submit a passing PT. ELAP did let a lot of labs slide and say you can use this for that and that for this, and we would like, and there are PTs out there that you can order. They may not have been in there in the past for water pollution, but they're out there. And so what ELAP has asked labs to submit in the past, you need to call us and ask us, check our website, and we will be very clear with you on what that is. And I'm pretty sure that Chris has been very diligent. I mean, we sit down and we talk about working with the labs, being very clear. So I'd be interested in seeing those emails. And there's a PT email box. You could ask the question.
The reason I asked the question was to get a little clarity, and I think that
Sure.
helps. There's apparently still some confusion, but I'm mostly concerned about parties that are just procrastinating and not getting it done. They have a responsibility as an accredited laboratory to comply with the expectations, which includes PT testing, and to plan accordingly to be able to repeat if the test fails. So what I'd encourage you to do with all of your other things is to get instead of an email, because you're hearing from folks, well, I didn't know, and this or that. Put a letter out to all 600 or so certified laboratories in preparation for next year of what your expectations are, where to go for information, where there's been confusion, attachments of maybe some confusing items from the past, so that this doesn't become a recurring theme every year. Because we can't have a program that goes on year after year with confusion, and so that should be cleared up. And then you're basically dealing with actors that just simply aren't doing what they're supposed to do, and that shouldn't be tolerated in the long run.
The other thing that we talked about back at the last meeting was putting something on the website that provided clear guidance to people so they would know, hey, here are vendors who are approved for PTs. Here are some PTs that were not available in the past that are now, just so they're, again, as Stephen put it, so there are no excuses.
Well, even, an extenuation of the FOT list, that it's like, here's the analyte, here's the method, yes, there's a PT, you can buy it from this place, this place, this place, this place. People can go and see, okay, there I know, okay, this one, no, on some of the bioassays, no, there's no, you need to do your proof of competency or what, however that's done. So yeah, having that all in one spot on ELAP's website would be wonderful. I know it's a lot of work, so I'm not pushing it right away, but yes.
And there has to be a caveat in there that essentially says there may be others who provide this. Otherwise you're
Exactly,
gonna get
yes, yeah.
some
Not
PT
single
vendors who are
sourcing,
gonna
but-
say you're
Yeah.
extraneous. Rich, you were gonna say something before?
Well, I was just going to provide the opposite experience. I ran into a small technical glitch on my PTs, and so I heard back from Chris and spoke to him on the phone, and it took a couple of times going back and forth, but we cleared it up in a reasonable amount of time, I thought.
So I had two other
Right,
items.
I was gonna say, next item.
And I'll make more statements out of concern that, and you can weigh them and figure out what to do. You indicated that for your consulting services for implementing TNI and selecting 6 laboratories, it's down to 2. I understand, it sounded like it was a budgetary reduction, but even with a budgetary reduction, one of my concerns with getting down to a limited number, when I assume you mean laboratories, it's the experienced labs that can help other laboratories launch in an ELAP. So it's not an accrediting company. So under that framework, the fewer laboratories you have involved, you run the risk of them not having the capacity to help the laboratories that need help. And so even if you went from $500,000 down to 100,000, I'd rather see 6 laboratories helping labs with 100,000 than 2 laboratories, simply because of potential capacity issues. I don't know if you understand the volume of those that may solicit help yet. And so consider that and weigh in your decision, because I think you may end up with a pool that doesn't have the resources to meet the need. And then the other comment is in regards to the regulations update. I'm happy to hear that you're receptive to the quarterly reporting, because I think the main thing there was concern that the staff would not have resources to review that volume of quarterly reports. And you're going to have a portion of laboratories that are going to launch NELAP quickly and or already NELAP certified, 100 or so. But let's just say there's another 400, maybe 100 can launch it quickly and 400 can't. You would have 400 annual audits to review. Our annual audits are unique because they apply to NELAP already, but annual audits can be quite voluminous. So are you going to have the staff resources to review those audits to satisfy the state agency concerns that in fact the laboratories are doing their work? It's a lot of documentation to review. So just issues to concern and some concerns that you should weigh in terms of going through those 2 particular processes.
Other comments from up here? Bruce?
I'm just going to make a quick comment to the ACIL, whom I represent. Those member laboratories were almost all NELAP accredited, and we could provide that type of resource to the folks. So like, we could give you a list of labs that are our members who, if people want to call them and talk to their QA, people about how to implement NELAP, I can give you a list of those labs that would be willing to do that. So we could take the 2 that you have in the pilot program and add the commercial labs to it. So if you have, I can get it.
Mindy, Diane, did you have?
I just wanted to go back to when you talked about the assessments that are currently being done, and using them to either help with the backlog of drinking water ones that are not quite up to date, and then providing the gap analysis. So there have been, over the last month, there's been a number, like heading down towards the Central Valley, that have had these assessments. The feedback that I'm getting is that some of them are being done just with the NV5 auditor and not an ELAP person. And I thought the whole point of the training contract was that it would be training an ELAP staff member as well. Some of them are labs that have been assessed within the last 6 months. So it seems like it's kind of a waste of resources to reassess a lab that was just assessed when we have a bunch on a backlog. And then labs are not being given a gap analysis. And when they're being asked about, well, what about this gap analysis to TNI? That was the whole point of coming in sooner than when we're really due again. They're being told by the NV5 auditor that, oh no, that would take a full another couple of days. We can't do a full gap analysis because you haven't even started it yet. So I just want to make sure that our money, your money, drinking water's money that's being spent on this is getting the benefit that it's really meant for. Because to me, it seems like a few of these audits that have been done, or assessments, or whatever we're calling them now, are being wasted in the sense that the lab was already certified, it didn't need it, we're not doing training, and we're not providing the gap analysis. So what's the point of it, other than that it fit in the path of travel, that these are all close by, you know, in a certain area? So that was a concern that we've had.
So I'm going to let Kate answer some of those questions.
There are quite a few points in there. So I think to your first point as to why some of the assessments are being done without an ELAP assessor, that's because we have a limited number of assessors and we can't schedule one of our assessors on every single audit and get them all done. So our assessors, this is just a pilot right now, these first group of 35 or so labs. Our assessors have been out in the field with these guys every day. So I mean, there are times, yes, where we won't be on an assessment, but that is also the other component of this contract, which is to get our drinking water labs that are, that need assessments, that assessment, so that they can benefit also from the gap analysis, which will be the checklist, which will be included in the assessment report. I don't think any of them have gone out yet.
Okay, and that's the other thing, is that the new policy is that the follow-up reports, you know, the new SOP was, will we be within a 4-week period? And some of these labs have gone past 4 weeks and they have not received it.
So again, this is, you know, this pilot phase, we're working through some logistical issues and figuring this out. This is a new process for us using a contractor with the state. So you know, I'd have to go back and look. I know for some of the first ones, we were pushing up against it, but, you know, initially there's a lot of this back and forth of how do we cite this? Where do we cite that? And so, you know, it is taking much longer in this first round than we anticipated taking moving forward.
Yeah, but I think after we work out some language issues, because we review the reports when they come in, and we have had issues with specific sightings that Kate just mentioned, but after we hammer all of those out, they will start moving.
Yeah.
And then as far as the gap analysis?
Yeah, should be with the report.
So even the ones that were told they're not getting a gap analysis, they should be getting one?
None of the reports have gone out and back out to the
Right,
laboratories.
yeah, no,
We're
but they
still
were just
reviewing
told
them.
at the time, you know, that they will not be getting one, so
And
they
that
should
may
be
just
getting it,
be,
okay.
Again, that we're just figuring this out.
Okay, sure, okay.
We have regular meetings with the contractor, and I'll make sure that we talk to them and ensure that, I mean, that is part of it. We've seen a gap analysis checklist and approved it.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And then one last concern that came up on it is that the labs are being told that they're being audited to the 18th edition standard methods only. And that is what they were told. The MV5 person said, no, that's what ELAP has directed us. That's what I made my checklist off of and everything. But I just want to make sure that everybody's aware there are other methods that are approved.
Yeah, I think we've clarified that since then,
Okay.
because we got revised checklists from them also, and so, again, one of those logistical hiccups that we have to deal with in the beginning, so.
I brought up my list of things that they bring to me.
Yeah, we
so.
anticipated we would have some of these road bumps, but we're moving forward and we'll be able to address all of those concerns.
Okay. Other questions from Northern California on any of these? Questions from Southern California?
David here.
Go ahead.
All right. I wanted to echo what Steve said about the quarterly reports to annual reports. I don't think that really resolves anything, because the issue is, well, there's two issues. One is, what is an internal audit? There's no definition for what that is, because this is for the lab is not currently in compliance with the T&I components of the proposed regulations. So what would constitute an internal audit? Second is, so without that present, how would anyone assess whether an internal audit is acceptable or not acceptable? There's no criteria for what's an acceptable audit, what's not an internal audit, what's not acceptable. And then there's the capacity issue. Who's going to review 500 plus annual reports? And then the big concern with the quarterly reports was, we could easily generate reports because we're doing good, but nobody's going to read it. It's just busy work. And this just sounds like a bunch of busy work. The second point is on the on-site assessments. And I've gotten the same feedback from that Mindy's gotten. Everyone says that the contractors are very personable, very professional. They're doing, a good job in showing up on time and getting through it. The big issue I'm hearing back on is how much time it's taking. Taking 2 to 3 times as much time to do an on-site assessment now versus what was in the past. A lab that might have only, a small number of very relatively simple tests, microbiology and general chemistry, general physicals, like that. Normally their audit might be 4 hours, and now it's a day and a half, 3 times longer. Other labs are reporting the same thing, though. Their lab would normally take 1 day, now it's taking 3 days. And that's just for drinking water. These labs are not necessarily being assessed for the wastewater side of their laboratories. So it's a day and a half just for drinking water, when in the past it might only be 6 hours or 4 hours for both drinking water and wastewater. And none of this, of course, has anything to do with the whole effluent toxicity testing. So this is just the basic microbiology and chemistry. And, and then also, as Mindy mentioned, a lot of these labs have recently already gone through an assessment. So this is, I think the big issue is, and this has been raised in the past, is the way things are going forward, it's going to take a lot more resources to stay on track to keep labs assessed to the current, biannual schedule, given the lengthy nature of these on-site assessments. Additionally, on the PTs, if we're going to do some sort of update, it might be useful to remind people what constitutes late, because historically it's been prior to the, and the anniversary of your certificate expiration date. So, if that's still the case, then we should remind people that's what it is. But if there's been some change, then we should let them know about that too.
I thought historically, David, it's by the end of the calendar year.
That's right.
Well, that's an interesting question.
Yeah. I don't think either of those are technically correct
They're
based
not
on our current
technically correct.
regulations. So one of the things that we have run into quite a bit is that laboratories don't do annual testing. So in their off year, we have laboratories that tell us frequently, oh, you never made us do annual tests before, we never had to submit them. Those are due by the 1-year anniversary date of your certificate. During your renewal year, they're due by the day you turn in your application, so 90 days prior. There is a timeline graphic on our website right now, in addition to the list of PT vendors that are approved, that visually lays that out for you, so anyone can go check that out, if that's an easier way kind of to visualize those due dates. But that is what's currently in our regulations. It has been in our regulations since the mid-90s. I'm not sure if it was different in the prior version, and we realize and recognize that ELAP was not great in the past at holding people to those deadlines, and that's why we are choosing to work with laboratories so that we can be clear about the expectations. But moving forward, I think those deadlines may change. I'm not sure what they are in the draft, but we'll be very clear about those expectations before the adoption.
Okay, anything else from Southern California? Then we've got a few more up here in Northern California. Okay, we'll switch back to Northern California. Gail.
This is a question for Caitlin. I think I read in the regs that, first of all, the certificates now have a 1-year renewal time. So that means that the PTs are always going to be due on the date of the certificate renewal. Is that correct? No? Okay.
It's not a 1-year renewal.
Okay, so what, is it still 2 years?
Oh, well, right now it's still all proposed.
Okay.
And so we're working those details out.
Okay.
But it's not, they're not gonna be 1-year certificates, as
Yeah,
far as I know.
Our statute has 2 years.
Yeah.
So our regs have to be consistent
Yeah.
with what's in the statute.
Okay, so what's proposed then? I thought I was reading 1 year in here, that's why I was, just to clarify what's gonna be the timing.
Well, what we've put forward already is what's there.
It's still proposed.
Yeah,
We're
it's a
still-
policy decision that we're kind of going through, and that's one of the things that we heard in our workshops is what is it? What's the final timeline gonna be? How long are the certificates gonna last? It appeared that there was confusion and it was ambiguous, and so those are the things that we're currently working on.
Okay.
But I think they will still be 2-year certificates unless we went forward with changing the California Health and Safety Code.
Okay.
So it will be 2 years, but the big change I think that was proposed was that we would align those application dates.
Okay.
So that, maybe that's where the confusion is coming from.
Yeah, that and what we were exploring is having assessments every 3 years, but again, the law says that the certificates are only valid for every 2 years.
Okay, that's current regs, right? That's
The
still
current law,
Yeah.
the code, health and safety code.
Okay.
So we will note, what David's comments are on, it's still draft, still proposed language, and we are still going to convene and talk about any additional changes. So we will note your comments, David.
Okay, one last question for you, Christine. In terms of the PTs
Mhm.
and the software, you mentioned that you're moving forward, but not there yet. Any sense of the timing of when you might have software acquired?
Yeah, so anytime you acquire technology, you have to go through a business analysis process that's not dictated by our agency, but by another agency. But we did hit a big milestone in this stepwise approach that we're taking. So I can't tell you. We've been trying to pin them down, but I can't say.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right.
Can I ask one more question, David, down here?
Diane raised her hand first.
Oh, okay,
and as the
sorry. I
newbie,
didn't.
she gets precedence over the old.
Absolutely.
You mentioned the possibility of aligning the dates for the laboratories. So everyone's renewal would come due at the same time? Is that what you mean by that? Yes. So assessments then would all be jumbled up against that date no? So how would that work?
I think the philosophy is that we want to divorce the paper application process from the assessment process. So you have to have an assessment within a 3-year time period.
Okay.
Right, and then that would satisfy the applications for that next cycle, I guess, 2 years. And then, depending on when the assessment was. But you are required to have one within 3 years, and then the application process that we're working on, part of the database we're looking at acquiring is an online application as well. So that, will assist us in processing all of them.
And it's consistent with a lot of the board programs that have thousands of waste discharge requirements and general permittees that are in the thousands, and we have approximately 700 or less. So it's doable. We're working on that database.
In that question before it gets down to Southern California, TNI requires assessments every 2 years. So
We're not a
We're
TNI.
no, I understand. So what you'd have is, I'm very confused at this point, because if laboratories are transitioning to TNI, they would need to comply with TNI at every 2 years for their national accreditation, but then they'd be certified in California. So, yeah, you're gonna need to reconcile that
If
for
you're a
me.
TNI lab, then you to be accredited to TNI by an accrediting body, you will have to comply with what TNI asks you to
Okay, so
comply
what you're saying is the other laboratories will have a California unique, 1 PT, for example, accreditation, and they'll be certified every 3 years.
and assessed.
Assessed every 3
Assessed
years.
every 3
Yeah.
years.
Okay, I think I have my head around that.
I know, there's overlapping timelines.
Yeah, we're not in the TNI club.
Yeah, I understand.
And-
Yeah,
Well,
in the future, I have a sense you guys probably will move in that direction, but for now.
yeah. And our standards are the TNI, but we are not in the TNI.
And the whole 3-year is a new thing though, because current or old regulation or whatever was every 2 years, that was what you couldn't get your new certificate unless you were assessed, and that was a 2-year application process. So the 3-year is a change
a proposed change.
Proposed change, sorry.
It
You should be working with Kim back there very closely. Maybe you have been, that's why.
And that will occur upon regulation adoption.
All right, David.
There we go. All right, these are, taking notes here. So there's two things, and they're related. One is a lot of labs right now are getting interim certificates, which are only good for 1 year and can't be renewed until you have an on-site assessment. So I just want to know what's going to moving forward, how that process is going to work out. And then in regards to the proposed 3-year cycle, one of the comments that was submitted was that, our fees recently doubled. And the reason they doubled was so that ELAP could be whole, to be, financially whole to provide the necessary services. And that was based on a 2-year cycle. So we're paying fees based on a 2-year cycle. But now we're going to be getting a 3-year cycle. And I think that's an issue that was raised in comments and needs to be addressed at some point.
Okay, that sounds like it was a comment,
Yeah.
not a question per se.
If the fee group wants to take up that comment when they get together next, you guys can.
But I do have a question on the interim certificates, the existing interim certificates.
So I think I can answer that for you, David. The laboratories that are getting interim certificates are drinking water laboratories in anticipation of their MV5 assessment. And, we track them and we understand that they're expiring and ELAP is acting on those certificates before that happens. So that's kind of the logic behind what's happening with those.
But, non-drinking water laboratories are also getting interim certificates.
Yes, that is correct.
That's correct.
So,
There may be.
But each lab, it's very hard to generalize. Each lab is on a case-by-case basis, depending on their status, depending on when they submitted their application. So we follow the rules and the law, and we don't issue another interim back-to-back. Sometimes we use interim to buy ourselves time because we don't have the resources to assess them. Sometimes labs ask for them, so.
But also, you have in the past issued an interim, not done an assessment, and then issued a full certificate to get them off of interim.
Right, we can do that.
Yeah. So I just want to say that, because David was saying that it can't happen without an assessment, but that's not true, because I know of labs that have had that happen.
Right.
So,
well,
yeah.
I'm just saying what it says in regulation.
Yeah,
Okay, any other comments either from the south or from the north? Up,
One more question.
Miriam.
On the timeline. So the timeline we're looking at, now because with the draft and everything, obviously moving it back. Will all of our dates that are in the draft regulation move back as well? Because the one thing when I think ELTAC proposed the whole 3-year to get up and ready is that it would be from the time, regulation was adopted. So if the dates do not move back, a lot of cities are not going to start putting the money and the resources out. Some are, obviously they're already sending people to training and doing that. But a lot of them are not moving forward on this at all until it, is in law or close to being in law. Because otherwise then, if something happens where it falls apart, they've wasted their city's money, basically. They've wasted taxpayer money. So I just want to make sure that our timeline, because you had even brought up, January 1st, 2019, earlier and stuff, but if all of this is being pushed back much further than what we had hoped, are the deadline dates for when we're going to be expecting this to be, labs to be fully certified will be adjusted accordingly.
Everything will shift.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But we're still moving forward. We're just limping on one leg. Kind of just until we can get a full crew. And then we'll be back up to speed.
It's all Miriam's fault.
Miriam's like, wait, I had to come for her for 2 months.
That's all we needed from you was 6 more months.
But you wouldn't do it.
But congratulations.
We will no longer complain about Christine. All complaints will be about Greg because he won't be part of ELAP, so.
Who was
All right.
complaining about Christine? Come on, man.
All right, we won't complain about the regulations. Christine will say it was all Miriam's
Yeah.
fault,
Okay.
and she left.
She
All
can
right.
handle it.
So we're actually running ahead of schedule still, even with all of that. So I'll turn the floor over to Jacob for fields of accreditation.
Okay, thank you. So another front that we're working on is our fields of accreditation. As you all know and have seen in the proposed draft regulations, the fields of accreditation are not included in the draft regulation text. And what I want to communicate is really that what we're trying to do there is to allow us the more flexibility to change them as needed. And what the hope is that this would be in order to help meet your needs and also to offer the methods that are relevant. In the packets that you guys have received, you've seen there's several pages of draft FOTs. And what we're proposing is to reorganize them based on method and technology. So from a programmatic perspective, we think that this is a way to help simplify things on our end. And what we want is we want to hear from you in terms of what benefits or even what heartaches you anticipate, you might anticipate in switching over to this format. Thank you to Andy for your help in drafting these FOTs. And it's short and sweet, but now I would like to just kind of open up the floor. We would take any comments you have now. And again, as always, we always accept and we read and value comments that come through our comments inbox, California ELAB _comments at waterboards.ca.gov.
I'll take the part of the chair with the first question. I had actually sent you an email, but I noticed in skimming this, there were some methods that are approved in federal regulations and frankly have been approved in California in the past too, that were missing from this.
Right.
So it's the age-old problem of just trying to be sure you've got everything.
Yeah, and we appreciate those comments like that, and that kind of just circles back to the flexibility that we need as a program in order to update these. So thank you again.
Andy, I have a couple comments.
Stephen, okay, Stephen's deferring to you.
I interrupted last time.
So go ahead, David.
All right, yeah, well, one is, we actually went through this process 18 months ago.
Yeah.
During the ELTAC meeting, like May of 2016, where we were asked the same question, and ELTAC formed a subcommittee, which came together with a bunch of proposals for FOTs. We had a meeting in June where we discussed that, and we voted unanimously for a particular set of FOT format and organization. So there's an interesting process question here. Did you guys look at that and then decide those were no good and to start from scratch?
Yes, sir. No, we did look at them, and I mean, it also has to kind of flow and work with our internal process as well. And so we're just kind of continually evaluating, and this is evolving as we go through. And so this forum here for 18 months ago was valuable, and any comments that you may have now would be just as equally valuable.
Yeah, a lot fed into this, the fees work group discussions, the feedback they got from the workshops when they went on the road show. So it's not over.
It's evolving.
This is still.
So my second comment or question along these lines is, if you don't want these in regulation, there's no problem with that, except to the extent that our fees are based on FOTs. In that case, then it does become a problem. For example, if you were to implement this table right here, my fees would go up because you split out ion chromatography from general chemistry, which it now is. So now I would need 4 FOTs instead of 3. My FOT fees have gone up by 33%. So if you don't want FOTs in regulation, then you can't have fees based on FOTs.
But that's speculative because the fee work group has some models that they are looking at. And I think that maybe you all that are in the fee work group can take some of these comments that David had and discuss it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly just, playing the role of somebody who's on the fees work group, and Mindy can pop in here also, and so can Diane for that matter, but I think everything we were leaning towards in terms of proposals was either method-based or essentially analyte program-based. It was either, unit of accreditation or a method. So I think everything that we have discussed in the fees work group has really gone away from FOTs per se, because we recognize the fact that FOTs were changing, and therefore any model that we actually did based on FOTs could give us the completely wrong answer in terms of what kind of revenue it was going to raise.
The third comment is, and this goes back to the MUR discussion, ELAP needs to have to offer accreditation for methods. They need to be incorporated into California regulation, and the MUR methods are not yet incorporated into California regulation. Now, the difficulty here comes with enforcement. If a lab were to apply for accreditation for a new method that's not currently in ELAP's regulations, receive accreditation, and then fail an on-site assessment, fail a PT sample, the basis for then, say, retracting or revoking accreditation would be that you failed to comply with California regulations. If those methods aren't in California regulation, you can't say they're not complying with California regulation. So moving forward with, offering accreditation for methods that aren't in California regulation can create difficulties further down the line.
All right, a couple of comments, questions from up here.
Well, I have a
Bruce,
comment.
and then
It's
Steve.
Bruce here, David. I'm looking at some of these methods right now, and they're already out of date, or they're already not applicable. I don't want to choose radiochemistry because it is the stepchild, but honestly, it's a good place to start. None of these methods here are really what my lab would do if we're measuring radiation in soil. Just wouldn't do it. Water would be different, and I would make a comment that we ought to get out of putting methods into regulation because they're going to change. And we don't want to change regulations every time we change a method. We want to give labs the flexibility. So there'll need to be some kind of provision for a single lab validation or a multi-lab validated method, like alternative test procedure like the feds would have. Or if you're using a federally recognized method, that could be acceptable for California. But the issue of methods and regs will hamstring the entire program for years, unless we get away from that. So to David, to your point, we ought not to have methods and regulation. That's my point.
Andy, should I respond, or?
Well, I think Stephen was going to make a comment first, and then you can respond after that.
Or you have the methods and you have a process, which is currently in TNI, to develop internal methods that would be acceptable if they're not on the list.
Single lab validation.
Maybe there should be, on each of these, single lab validation would be acceptable upon proper submittal of documentation or something.
And you'll have this with pesticides and foods, and they're all over the map once you get out of the drinking water world.
All right, David, yours again.
Never mind. My whole point is about enforcement. You can only enforce what's in regulation. If it's not in regulation, you can't enforce it.
Andy, this is Hui from Los Angeles County Sanitation District. I do have a comment.
Go ahead.
So, Jacob, the list that you proposed here, this is not finalized, right? I want to make sure that it's not finalized because some of the methods that our laboratory used to be certified for by ELAP under the so-called .99, section, now we were told that we are not, ELAP's not going to certify us for those .99 methods. And I'm wondering if there's possibility for us to then incorporate those methods in the FOTs. That way, we don't have to go through the .99 process anymore. So, so going back to my original question, then this list is not finalized, and there's still possibility for us to add those methods in here.
Thank you, Huey, for the comment. No, this list is not finalized, and it's really based on what we offer currently. What we wanted to do is kind of just focus on the format of method and technology. So this is not a complete or finalized list.
So my follow-up question, Jacob, is, so if we were to get together with a few labs and put together a list of methods that we think are relevant and are the methods that we need to use to comply to our regulations, would you consider adding those to this list then?
Yes, those are, if you wanted to do that, that's good. But again, really, there's another component to this, is what are our internal resources, what are our internal capacity to accredit and offer those methods.
I see.
Stephen?
Okay, so in regards to internal capacities, I'm going to save your staff some 30 lines of accreditation in aquatic toxicology. What we submitted excluded the 027F, which is a 1994 method. EPA went through a method validation process for aquatic toxicology, and when they updated the methods in 2002 for the acute, the chronic freshwater, and chronic marine, they specifically updated them to address concerns expressed in litigation about the previous method manuals and improve quality assurance and quality control. So, and in fact, on all the permits I'm aware of, they wouldn't even allow for the use of the 1994 method. They cite the 2002 method manual. So almost the entire first page on the aquatic toxicology 1180 would be struck. I'll follow up with an email because they shouldn't be doing it. Labs shouldn't be using the old protocol because it had some limitations and it needed some improvements. The other question is what Bruce and I submitted were the FOT list for aquatic tox, which I just discussed, but also the Title 22, the hazardous waste toxicity testing. I don't see anything for the hazardous waste in here.
Okay.
It's unfortunately a very old protocol that desperately needs updated. It's a fish and game old protocol, 89 I think, but it is what the laboratories currently have to use to assess for hazardous waste approval for disposal in landfill. California has it, Title 22. So I'll follow up with both of those, but that definitely will be needed. Otherwise, nobody could do the assessment for landfill decisions of landfill disposal or hazardous waste.
Diane?
I'm new to this process, so please bear with me. It appears to me that we have two trains that are running parallel with FOTs and with methods. Will the FOTs matter if the fee structure goes to methods? Are we putting resources and time and effort into places where we're duplicating our effort? Should we decide on how we're going to base a fee schedule and work back to these? Just a question. I'm confused, I guess.
Okay, I'm going to let Jacob try to answer that. And I'll be happy to weigh in with some opinions.
If you want to weigh in, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is we can't get completely away from FOTs no matter what we do in terms of the fees, because you've still got to be able to differentiate drinking water and wastewater and hazardous waste activities.
But here we're not.
Pardon?
Here we're not. These FOTs are including the same FOT has drinking water and wastewater.
No,
so if we just had it by method.
No, these don't.
These, I mean, right here, isn't it?
It's wastewater and hazardous waste.
The FOA 1100 has all the drinking waters, and then the wastewaters are included right there in it. So we're combining them. Are we not? So I would think we just have it by method, and then matrix is included with method. I'm talking on page 1 of 3, right where the very first beginning of, like,
Okay,
so
so
there.
if you look at 1 of 3, you've got
So that,
101, which is all drinking water still. You've got 107, which is all wastewater.
right, but if you look at the top, it's a new proposed field of accreditation is
Ah,
all
okay.
1,100. They're all combined. So we're not breaking it up by drinking water, wastewater, or rec water anymore.
Well, the part of the confusion is that we have a subgroup code which uses the old 101, 107. If you look at the second column, it says subgroup code, and it's 101, 107, and 126, which match the old fields of testing that were in statute. But then they're grouped together under title 1100, which doesn't match any of the subgroups. Where Mindy's right, all those different subgroups are combined into one field of accreditation, 1100. So it's actually really confusing the way the subgroups don't match the overall field of accreditation.
Yeah, and good point. Yeah, I would say, I mean, that subgroup code there is just to kind of tie and connect where we're trying to go with what we have currently. If that helps you to provide any clarification
That's where
on
you
this.
currently find it.
Right.
So, yeah.
But
the intent is to include hazardous waste, drinking water, and wastewater under one field of testing.
That would be under following this idea of a method and technology.
But on the other,
Proposed.
yeah, on the other hand, you know, the fee stakeholders group doesn't yet know whether we're gonna go towards something that completely abandons program and matrix and just goes to method, or just goes to analyte, or whether it will stick with something that's a method and program or analyte method program. I mean, frankly, you know, as a lab that works in multiple matrices, I'd love something that is just method.
Or technology.
Yeah.
I agree with Bruce. We should try to get away from the method because it locks it in too much.
Well, the problem is all of the statute and regulation in fact, the whole creation of ELAP was to keep those things distinct. There used to be separate accreditation program. Hazmat, Department of Toxic Control had its own accreditation program. State Board had their own accreditation program, and Drinking Water had their own accreditation program. That's how it was started up, and the regulations and statute are all based on that assumption. And the federal and state regulations and statute all assume that there are only a limited number of methods. Unless the method is approved by the state, you can't use it. So that's the world we live in at the moment. If we want to go some other direction, you're going to have to rewrite all the federal and state regulations and statute.
All right. Other comments?
Yes, I have a comment.
Go ahead,
If we are going to combine all of these matrices also in one field of accreditation, is there going to, I mean, this is not a subject that you can separate out from the fees discussion, because we're going to have inequitabilities in the labs. We're going to see, like, if one lab does, all of the matrices versus one lab that just does drinking water, they're going to pay the same amount because they're, testing the same constituent, yet they'll pay the same amount, but it will take an auditor a lot longer to audit a lab that has, many different matrices that they're testing. So is there equitability involved in this as well if we're going to combine it with the fees? And I agree with David, like, for drinking water, I don't know how you can combine the FOT and all the regulations with all the other matrices, because drinking water has its own distinct requirements in federal regulations that cannot be mixed and matched with the other kinds of matrices.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, speaking on behalf of the fees work group, Miriam, we're really, I think, moving away from FOTs in terms of any fee proposals, and pretty much everything that was on the table as of our last meeting was either based on method, where the numbers that we were working with were really a combination of method and program. So, you know, a lab that was doing, let's say, total dissolved solids by standard methods 2540E, if that's the right method reference, in drinking water and wastewater, that would end up counting as 2. So, you know, we really were concerned about that equitability issue and being sure that labs were treated fairly, while at the same time recognizing that if somebody is doing 2540E, the time involved in auditing for doing it in drinking water and wastewater, as opposed to drinking water only, is not necessarily that much more. But we definitely, I don't think any of us were really inclined towards tying fees to the old FOTs, regardless of what we did in terms of restructuring FOTs. Mindy?
Well, I guess I'm kind of confused in that, you know, in proposing this, it's, you know, thank you to Andy for your help, but it sounds like you were almost confused as to how this is laid out with the new FOT with drinking water and wastewater. And it seems like there was an FOT subcommittee put together. I mean, granted, it was like 1.5 years ago, but then they haven't been asked to do anything in the last little while. And so to have this come back out with just, you know, without maybe bringing them back in and getting the input from the people who specifically provided that these methods are missing or these ones we need to add in, you know, maybe revigorating that subcommittee to rework these a little bit more instead of trying to have it as the whole group throwing in this, that, or the other. Because it just, to me, it still seems like maybe there are a few more unanswered questions about them than we thought.
And that's what this process is about. If I recall correctly, the initial proposal was based on analyte. And again, it has to work for the laboratories, but it has to work for ELAP as well. Yeah. And so it's evolving as we move forward. Things are changing. That maybe the format of organizing in by analyte, maybe that doesn't work internally anymore. And now we're kind of looking at this format. And so that's what the whole point of here is to get these comments.
Andy, when there's an opening, I'd like to comment.
Okay, let Mark comment first.
I think, you know, although this is a great process, and I agree with Mindy, I think that there should be a FOT subcommittee that goes over these and brings in additional information. I feel like we're almost putting the cart before the horse here. I think we need to decide on a path going forward with the fees subcommittee, decide this is the way we're going to structure our fees. And then once we decide how we're going to structure our fees, then come back to this and say, okay, now how does that fit within this new fee structure? And so we can make sure that there's no confusion, because right now I think there's a lot of confusion the way this is, and then how it's going to tie in with our fee structure. Our proposed fee structure is coming forth. So
our fee structure options.
Yes.
So, all right, David.
Yeah. I think, I'm agreeing with what Mark just said. We can't have a fee committee. We shouldn't let the entire organization be driven by fees, the way the structure is done. We want to have a structure that works for the accreditation program as a whole, and then we build the fees and the application forms and the on-site assessment around a unified approach. And that's what the whole FOT committee was working on, was not just a list of analytes or just a list of methods, but an approach to organizing the accreditation process. So the application would look similar to the fees, which would look similar to the checklist when we showed up for an on-site assessment, which would look similar to how PTs are assessed. We don't want these all not to match. And that's really what the idea of the original group was. And it wasn't organized by analyte. It was organized by program method analyte combinations, units of accreditation. So all, drinking water, ICP-MS, arsenic is one unit of accreditation. Wastewater, arsenic, hydride generation is a different unit of accreditation. Then the fields were simply groups of related units of accreditation. And the thought was then you would base the fees and the accreditation and the application on that structure. Right now we're having, the fees are going one direction, and so this is what Diane was saying as well. We're going 5 different directions depending on what's doing. We want a unified approach that works for the entire program. And that's what the group had proposed 18 months ago.
Glad to that we have a lot of the fee group members here to kind of listen in on these comments and kind of help guide you as well.
Okay.
And David Ciccarelli will be here later to present, and he could give his insight on the fees process.
All right. Any other comments, questions? We're right on schedule. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Cindy Zernicki. Am I allowed to comment because I'm not an ELTAC member?
No.
Okay.
Sorry. All right, so we are
Whispering Dave's ear.
right on time for breaking for lunch. So let's see. Respecting Stephen's experience trying to get up to this room, do we?
It's always my fault.
You're just the one who's pointed out the realities.
I have.
So do we want to try to do 1, or should we shoot for 1:15?
1:15.
Okay.
Why don't we say that somebody will be down in the lobby at 5 after to bring a group up?
Perfect.
And then I'll probably send a straggler down to bring all the stragglers up, so.
A question for staff. In the park, it looks like there's a little Mexican restaurant, or is that just a bar that's open at 8 a.m.?
No, it's delicious.
Okay, so is it like packed?
The bar is delicious or the whole restaurant?
I'm really surprised to see a bar open. Anyway, is it just going to be mobbed? Is that a place to go or to not go?
You know, I only went right when they opened.
It's slow?
No, they're pretty fast.
Yeah. There was a long line when I went, and
You're
they
gonna
were still
hit a
pretty
line,
quick.
but
Is that inside the park?
Yeah, it's right on it's on the opposite side facing the Starbucks. Yeah. Okay.
Lagoon is right there too, and then there's the solid place.
Yeah, the Greek place or whatever it is right there.
Okay, I don't know if you guys are adjourning for lunch, but we're adjourning for lunch.
We have officially adjourned for lunch, David. So, all right, let's get started. Dave, I believe you are up with the.
come up right here.
Yep.
You didn't just come from the Mandarin Orange there.
Okay, for cakes, lemon cake.
Lemon cake too there, huh? I didn't see that. Hey, thank you, everybody. My name is David Ciccarelli. I'm the fee coordinator here at the Water Board, and I oversee and manage all of our fee programs here, which would include, of course, water quality, water rights. We've got drinking water fees. We've got fees that support pretty much anything we do here, basically, at our organization, including our new cannabis program. So we've been spending a lot of time on that. And also, of course, the ELAP program that came over a couple years ago, and fees were put underneath my section. And so, with that said, I've been working with several of you guys for the last year and a half, myself and Ryan Wilson. And Ryan's not here today. Ryan handles a lot of our ELAP fees. He's up in Ukiah on one of our cannabis training programs and talking about our fees there. As you know, we currently have a fee schedule in place. And over the last couple of years, we've had some fee increases to ensure that we're generating enough revenue to support our program cost. So the current, again, our current fee structure is raising enough revenue. With that said, though, we've heard from the regulatory community requesting that we look at a new fee structure. Our board has directed us as staff to look at the structure that's been in place, and I think it's been in place, this structure itself, for 12, 13, 14 years or so. The structure itself, not the amounts, but the structure itself. And so it's been a good time to kind of look at it and see if there's some things that we can make more efficient and look at kind of drawing our cost towards our fees. that we collect in our revenue. So we've, the Division of Administrative Services, which houses our fee branch and where my section is, has developed a fee work group. And we've been meeting several times. We've had our first meeting May 30th, which was more of a welcome and kind of talking about our goal setting and kind of what we want to get out of this group. June 29th was our second meeting. And at that point, we basically asked everyone to kind of come to the table and give us a short presentation. I think we each presenter got about 10 minutes to go over their preliminary proposals. And it was a good opportunity. We were in a room for about 3 hours and we listened to almost about a dozen different proposals and gave feedback, questions and answers, talked kind of a little bit about pros and cons. And then we took that and we went back to the table and we met again on November 9th, kind of as a evaluation, revising the proposals basically. And we had narrowed that down at that point to around 7. And our goal originally was somewhere to have around 3 to 4 proposals. And the reason for that is our next step on this in this process of basically developing fee schedules was that we want to take this to the board as an informational item and as a workshop basically. And so some of these proposals that we had included, we had several of them that were built around a per method structure, 2 that were built around a UOA by difficulty structure, 1 was built around types of technology used, 1 was built around field testing structure. There were a couple of options including assessment charges or discounts for use of a third-party assessors, and then there's a general consensus to have a higher out-of-state laboratory base fee. And out of this meeting, we basically, stakeholders are now kind of fine-tuning and their options and based on feedback from the meeting. And so kind of talking about the work group itself and the workshopping this. So our next step in this whole process is then kind of getting the general public and our board members kind of familiar with kind of what we've been doing and what our efforts in the last year have been. So the workshop, and we're planning on taking this sometime in February. We haven't put out dates or anything like that yet, but we're looking sometime probably mid-February to take this to the board as a workshop item. For those that aren't familiar with that, basically what's going to happen is that we're going to get in front of the board. No decisions are going to be made. It's more just kind of information for the board to kind of understand what we've been doing. We'll kind of talk about some of the issues we see here at the State Water Board and ELAP. The program itself will have a proposal on the books and explain that proposal. And then the stakeholders will be able to then present their proposals. And then at that point, it's almost like an open discussion. Most likely what's going to happen is the board will give us direction, kind of one way or another, what they're leaning, or they may ask us to kind of go back and get more feedback, research a little bit more. And same thing, there may be some homework assignments for the stakeholders themselves when it comes to their options. And with that said, if everything kind of falls in place, our goal right now is to then go in April 2018 to take a proposal to the board for adoption. Now, with that said, we know that you guys are still in the regulatory development process, and that the way that the fees and the information we collect through the regulations, there may be some future changes to the fees themselves. So what we know right now, we're going to develop the fees off of, and if there are changes, through the regs, we have what's called emergency regulatory authority, so we can at any time go to the board and make changes to our fee schedules. So we want to drive this forward. The other thing, and this hasn't been decided yet, although this gets adopted by our board and we get a resolution in April, we may not take this to Office of Administrative Law and become part of the regulation until maybe July 1st, which would be the start of the fiscal year. So we haven't decided that time frame yet, and we have time to do that. It's still a discussion that we'll have to vent out again with the stakeholders, with program staff, with management, with our board members. But that will be an item that a point of discussion that we'll be discussing at our workshop meeting with the board. So we've been moving along. I think, again, for those that have been involved with the work groups, I think it's been a positive meetings, and we've come a long way with our approaches. I think when we started, we had a lot of different approaches out there, and now we're, again, narrowed it down, and what's been good is, others like, for me, I was looking at it one way, and now I've seen others, and I think I like their approaches better than the one I originally was looking at. So I think it's been a good, positive meeting. And do you have anything on the
No, I think you covered it really well.
Okay.
Particularly the part where the beauty of emergency regulations, that it can change based on the draft regulations, on what form they are adopted to be. So it's not set in stone. All programs, correct, Dave, they change. They revisit the fee structure, the fee amounts every year.
Correct, and just to get a little bit about our fee setting process itself when it comes to the state budget. So we're through the water code, we're required to set fees that generate sufficient revenue to meet our program cost. And with that said, the January proposed budget will come out around Jan 10th, Jan 15th, around that time frame. So at that point, we're going to see basically what we refer to as a line item for the ELAP program. It's going to show us how much cost it's going to take, or our appropriation dollar amount to support the ELAP program. With that said, we start running the numbers. We look at how many labs we have out there, how many field of testing, look at the amounts, our base fees. So under our current fee schedule, we start running and seeing, okay, can we generate enough money under our current fee schedule? With that said, then the May revise comes out. There could be changes to that. Through the budget process, you have things like healthcare costs, retirement, kind of standard operating costs that are built into that. Anytime there's negotiations on salary increases, now that's outside of the water board's development process. That's through the unions and through the unions negotiate things like the engineers and the scientists and those different classifications. But that's all gets built into the governor's budget. We see that. With that said, we try to build a little bit of a reserve in the ELAP program, like any of our funds, for things like economic uncertainties and things like that. So we try to carry that reserve where we're at times able to use that to offset needed fee increases, or at least minimize if that's the case. As of right now, looking at the numbers, again, we're doing okay, and but until the January budget, proposed budget comes out, and at that point, what I like to do is set up, some type of meeting, or participate in another meeting with the ELAP group that'll kind of discuss the cost drivers. Here's the budget. Here was the budget in 17-18. Here's it in 18-19, and here's the differences, and what impacts that would have on the fee payers.
Quick question on reserves. I believe that there's been 2 years of reserve set-asides. My recollection is like 3%, something like that. And you're moving into another year with some uncertainty in terms of how fee structures will be set up. So from just a business 101 perspective, do you guys look, obviously you need to have the reserves for some uncertainties, but as you carry over reserve after reserve after reserve, do you guys then adjust the fees accordingly?
We do. You'll notice this definitely in our water quality programs and things like that. When our reserve gets a little too high, then what we'll do a lot of times is we do what's called kind of a 1-year credit, basically. And so we won't change the fee schedule itself, but in the fee schedule, we'll put some language in there saying for 17-18, all fee payers shall receive a 4% or 5% discount. And then when the next reg comes out for the following year, that language gets stricken out of the language. But what that does is it lowers our reserve, basically.
Other questions? Anything from Southern California? Questions for Dave?
Sure. Excuse me. if I understand the schedule correctly, you want to have a fee package before the board on April 8th of 2018, not for adoption, but just for approval. Is that right?
Well, when we take a fee schedule to the board will adopt it. And they and what they're doing is they're actually adopting a resolution. So they are adopting the fee schedule. With that said, we may not immediately take it over to the Office of Administrative Law to get it put in regs. We usually have, for most of our fee schedules, we do that because we need to generate revenue to help support the program costs, things like that. In this case, again, we already have a fee schedule in place that generates the revenue. So it's not that we're in a hurry to get that done. We're almost more looking at like a timing of when's the appropriate time to start charging the fee with this new fee schedule, because we know right now fees get throughout the year basically kind of assessed, and I think the last one was February or so, or that we went out with, right, Kate? So we want to make sure there's a appropriate timing where we're not assessing one fee and then shortly after that we're assessing the next one. So that's more or less kind of, it's a timing issue. Again, we need to kind of vent that out and kind of discuss that. But it may be best just to start, July 1 with the new fiscal year.
Real quick, is this the end of the presentation?
For fees, yes.
Okay. Then going back to the previous discussion on fields of testing, it seems like we got the cart before the horse here. We don't know how the accreditation program is going to be organized, because the fields of testing, at least currently, are really the structure for accreditation. The fees are currently based on them. The PTs are assessed based on them. On-site assessments occur based on what fields of testing you're accredited for. It's sort of, at this point, the framework for accreditation. And fees should, I think, fall in that same sort of framework. And so if we're doing one direction with fields of testing and a different direction with fees, that doesn't seem like a really efficient use of ELAP's resources, our resources. It seems like you ought to step back, resolve the regulation, the bigger framework of the regulations as a whole. And I should point out, in the at least the preliminary draft, there were sections about fees in there. There was a section about an on-site assessment fee if ELAP does on-site assessment. Well, that's, that impacts what you're doing. So it seems like you got to step back and finish the regulations first before completing anything on fees. That's my opinion.
Do you want to take a little bit out of?
Well, only that it's a separate process. Even though there is a nexus between our proposed regulations and what the fees could be based on those new regulatory requirements, right now it's separate. I mean, we have, as I've said, the beauty of these every year revisiting the fee structure and the amounts. We should be examining them to make sure that if we can make any changes or tweak them, and that's what the fee group is really doing right now.
So I don't see any particular rush. As was mentioned, you're raising currently enough fees to run the program. That's the key point. And then it's just really a question of how you slice and dice that, how you distribute that among the participants, the accredited laboratories. And so the key problem is already solved. You have enough money. Why not? It just seems to me, and I've obviously said this, it makes more sense to me to solve the big problem, arrange the accreditation program. It's true that there are two separate processes for fees and non-fees. That doesn't mean that you have to do it right now. There's no rush. That's my only point.
It seems to me, David, and this is Andy, that we can still have, to a certain extent, the parallel tracks, because the discussions that we've had as a fee work group have really boiled down to things like, okay, do you look at methods as being your primary driver for fees? Do you look at analytes and programs as being it? What do you do in terms of out-of-state labs? What do you do in terms of third-party accreditation? And those are all discussions that I think, can and should move forward so they're not held back until after the regulations are in place, because I don't think that those fundamental concepts depend on exactly the final detailed shape of the regulation, because we know the general shape of the regulation.
Well, I'm going to have to disagree there. I think we're definitely having the tail wag the dog here. For example, third-party assessors. That's not in current regulation. That's a major change, and that will not be resolved in the fees. That will be resolved in the regulation. The fee regulations can't determine the nature of third-party assessments, whether it's mandatory or voluntary. That has to be done in regulation. Same with the FOTs. If you decide you want to go with an FOT-based fee, then those have to be set in regulation. Everything you just discussed, all of those things are principally driven by non-fee-based regulations.
Well, I think, with the third-party assessors, right, if that becomes part of your regs, then that's again, part of us looking at the fee schedule when these new regs get developed, and if we want to incorporate a fee for the third-party assessors, then it'll be the opportunity we take that to the board.
Miriam from MWD, I'd like to say something. I think that's a valid point. I don't know how stable it would be that every year we're gonna, have to go back to the board and change the way we assess fees because it just, something else changed and, now we have to consider TPAs, or now we have to consider this other thing that happened, or we redid the FOT list. So, since we are getting enough money right now to run the program, and to make it easier on labs, especially public labs who need to know, how much to budget for paying for certification, can we make it a more reliable, number that we don't have to keep adjusting and changing?
The fee structures, it's my understanding that you're going to take it down to 3 or 4 and then have people look and talk about it. It's also my understanding that the fee structures as they're set up now are set up in a variety of ways, that there are FOTs, there's methods, there's technologies, that's all incorporated into it. And the bottom line is there's a certain amount of money that needs to be derived from these fees, and I think all of that's covered in what you just presented and will be available for discussion when these things become available.
That's correct.
Other comments?
And the board, the board may say, you know what, we want you guys to continue to work with the work groups, and it may not go into April. We need to be able to have a time frame for the board. And so they asked us again to workshop it and then put a schedule together for adoption, shortly after that, or a few months after that. But again, through the workshop process, the board may say, you know what, we want more time on this, and maybe 6 months or so. So we'll get better feedback, when we do take this to the board, and after that, more guidance and direction. And then again, the adoption date may change, but as of right now, we've been asked to kind of put a timeline together. We put this timeline together back in November, and which is about a 6-month span. And so, and with that said, I think we were working with you guys on the regulation development and maybe looking at this being developed in May or June at one time.
Yes.
And so we were trying to go in line with you guys at that time. And I understand now you guys have again been moved back, but we still kind of want to go on our rail here of trying to get this adopted in a timely manner.
Mindy.
Do we have a time frame for the next meeting, or when we will do that 3 or 4?
I think Ryan and them are working on it right now, and we'll be sending out something shortly.
And once those 3 or 4 options have been fully developed and are ready for discussion with the state board, I assume that we'll be putting that out to laboratories out that are certified, so that way we
Yes,
can.
exactly. So we'll have to do a staff report. So we'll put that out. It'll probably come out maybe about two to 3 weeks prior to our workshop. And so each of those options will be laid out and a little discussion points on each of them. And it'll get, and you guys are, again, more than welcome to participate in the meeting and come to the workshop and provide comments as needed.
Just for confirmation on the going out, it'll be sent out via the Lyris
list.
Lyris
Yes.
listserv?
Yes.
From their shop.
Yeah. And they'll also be posted on our board's website if you're familiar with going to the board meetings and then all the documents and stuff like that. They'll be on there.
So point of clarification, you said from their shop?
Yeah, it's officially from their shop, but we will mirror it and send it through
So
our
for the
Lyris.
ELAP group, it'll be distributed
Yeah.
as well? Okay, great, through the ELAP link. Good.
Okay.
All right. All right, thank you for your time.
All right, the next item on the agenda, Dr. Weisberg, who's been sitting there quietly. Oh, wait, you couldn't talk.
So, and I did a bad thing, and since I forgot, you all have your packets sent out to you a week ahead of time, and I did mine on the plane up here, so. You know. But hopefully you'll have availability of these afterwards. So, there's a clicker, right? Wonderful. Let's go back to
Yes, sir, right.
Okay, so the starting point for this is that my organization does an laboratory intercalibration exercise for labs in Southern California that participate in our bite-wide regional monitoring program once every 5 years. That's the frequency with which you do our regional monitoring program. And the reason this is so important is that we do this regional monitoring program collaboratively. So not one lab processes everything, but we normally have, depending on the parameter, anywhere from 5 to 10 labs. And so in order to get a condition of how does the Southern California bite look and know it's comparable, we need to do an intercalibration exercise. We do it for a variety of things. Obviously, this group is a little bit more focused on chemistry than other things. But we do it for microbiology, we do it for nutrient chemistry, we do it for toxicology, we even do it for biological identification. So for benthic invertebrates, we actually have a group that will grab a pile of mud, pull out all the inverts, then do all the IDs, and then they will reconstitute the sample and send it on to the next laboratory, just so we can see how repeatable those kinds of things are. And the group that I work for, the SWRCB Commission, which is the heads of 14 water quality management agencies, has told me that they actually value this exercise more than they actually get out of the results of the bite-wide regional assessment of condition. And the reason is that they all have labs that participate in this, and they learn how those labs are doing, and what they're doing in the regional program is, 3%, 5% of what that lab does that year. It's in a sense a chance for them to learn about what the lab, how well the lab is doing on the other 95%. So that's all great. Steve has a great program. Who cares? So why am I here today? Is Christine has approached me and said that she would like us to, and I am willing to, open up this intercalibration exercise to the ELAP labs. And I think her motivation for this is twofold. Motivation number one is this is some feedback that she has gotten from her state agency partner committee. You all have heard before, the state agency partners are concerned with performance evaluation samples are just such a simple matrix that they don't get a real feel for what the true variability is across the laboratories. And we're open to doing this. And moreover, at her request, some of you are aware that while we do a regional monitoring program in Southern California, there's a group called the San Francisco Estuary Institute that does a program like that in Northern California, and we've approached them and they seem interested in participating. So this is just an opportunity now to be able to put some of the results that you all might be getting from your, sampling into context of and know that's comparable to what was going on in 2 regional monitoring programs. So my goal today is to kind of tell you a little bit about how we do this, what we've been finding out about it from doing it, and see if there's interest among you all in participating, and see if there's things that we could do to make it of more interest to you. And bottom line, if nobody's interested, that's fine. I got a fun program. I'll go back and do that. So what our approach is that we gather large volumes of ambient. I put sediment because it's not always sediment. Sometimes it's fish and other things. But in this particular case, what we're talking about is getting you involved in the sediment program. So we go out and do we go out and gather large volumes. I say like large volumes, like 50-gallon drum volumes. And we take them back and we put them in a big industrial mixer, and we do a lot of things to ensure that the samples are truly homogenized. And then we give out aliquots, replicate aliquots, to different labs and say, process them. And then we bring them all back together, examining reproducibility within cross labs. And so we're looking to see, what is the variability within lab versus what's the variability across lab, and how does that compare to what are the expectations that our clients have. When we have done it in the past, we've done it with pH, PCBs, pesticides, and metals. This year, we're even talking about doing algal bloom chemistry, like cyanotoxins and domoic acid. But we're really open to a variety of things. We want to tie it to something that we're doing in our BITE program, so it relates to that, but honestly, there's a lot of opportunity. Once you're doing this, it's not that hard to add other analytes. So just to give you an idea of kind of what the results look like, this is actually a result from BITE 13. One of the things I'll point out to you later is that we only put the names of labs. We typically give them by letters. The labs have elected to have their names on it. But you can see, you get to see the within laboratory variability, across laboratory variability. And we set as a requirement to participate in our BITE regional program that you've got to be within 40% of the mean. And as you can see, all the labs have achieved that. So what are the benefits of participating in something like this? Well, you get a variety of benefits for a variety of people. For the ELAB clients, I see a few of the members of the State Agency Partner Committee in here. What you're getting is, when you get a result from an ELAB certified lab, how much variability should you expect if you lump data across labs, or if you were to say this result, if you sent it to another lab, how different would the result be? So you get a quantification of that with real world samples. For the individual laboratories, they benefit a lot from a better understanding of their relative performance. So I have a few people in the room. I think, Steve, you've participated in toxicity. Mm-hmm. Rich, you've been involved in chemistry. I think Ron Koss is a participant. He's been one. I think this is a representative from LA County Sanitation. They've been a participant. Yeah. They've all found that they gain a lot because what we don't do is we just don't do it and give it out and then be done. What we do is we hold a meeting afterwards to talk about why are there differences, and we sometimes do even 2 or 3 rounds. Let me show you what we found in 1998. This is the first time, actually the second time. The first time we did it, the results were so bad, we didn't have time to actually clean things up. And we basically said, this model won't work. We have to just give it to all one lab. In 98, we took the time to try and get it right. So this is the first round. So blind samples to, and you can see lab 1 through 6. And pHs, and you can just see the totals here. That's a pretty wide range of difference. I'm showing you pH numbers. We have very similar numbers for PCBs. We got similar numbers. Actually, metals were never bad, but particularly the organics were always bad. Pesticides were even worse. And you can see it really runs the range of sometimes these low numbers are just due to a lot of non-detects. In some cases, it's due to just very real differences in the numbers where there are detects. And so what we did after this exercise, and this is something Rich was very actively involved in, we started doing all kinds of exercises, all optional, but we had like one group do the extraction and pass the extracts out to everybody else to see if the problem was in the extraction process. We actually had people switch labs and to go run it on somebody else's machine to see if it was a machine-oriented problem or if it was a person-oriented. And what we did is we got down to this, same sample at the end. And you can see now the range of variability. So again, it was a great learning opportunity for laboratories. And I'll tell you there's memory in the system. I didn't have the BITE 13 numbers for this one with me, but you can see the first time, that was the coefficient of variability. That's what it was afterwards. And in this particular year, I think it was 18%. I just didn't have these numbers with me to flesh that out. Whenever we bring a new lab on, this is the memory in the system for labs that have participated continuously. We bring a new lab on, what we find is it's always this. So again, there's real value. I show you, this one happens to be for the pHs, but just to show you the same exact patterns. And this one I did have a BITE 13. this is what the numbers look like. So there's value to the labs. There's also benefit for ELACT, because one of the things, again, this goes back to the agency partner committee, one of the things that they've complained about is we don't think the performance evaluation samples are valuable. I'll show you a graphic that says they are for zinc. I don't really know what it is for the others, but this is the kind of thing we could actually build into the program, is get the performance evaluation sample variability that you see with the existing powdered kind of sample, and then compare it to this. And if it turns out that we're getting this level of result, well, then that says a lot to the agency partner committee about don't need to do these kind of things so much. On the other hand, if it turns out very differently, it tells you a lot too. So anyway, the vision that we have for this, and I say the vision, this is where I've talked with Christine, is one, this is entirely voluntary. I think her philosophy is that the program is not about just enforcing and being a pain in the ass. It's about how do I help the labs get better? And she sees this as a potential way to do that. Not every lab will want to do it, but there are labs that do want to do it, and so there's a. The second is will be anonymous. Labs will be assigned a letter, and you'll be the only one who knows what letter you are. If you want to unmask the letter, and the labs that do well typically do want to unmask the letter, we'd be glad to do that. We'd let you do that. And the thought process is any lab that wants to use those graphics to show where they're at relative to everybody else is free to do so. And I will tell you that this has actually been one of the big benefits. I think even in Southern California, a lot of the contract lab, or the groups of contract labs are now saying you need to be part of this in order to work for them. Okay, it's not had nothing to do with ELAB, it's just what they've chosen, they've realized the value of this. The next part is that there'll be no cost. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be a cost, because you've got to process your own samples. You got to show up if you want to, you want to do that debrief meeting or do any of the follow-up activities. If your lab doesn't do well, and you want to do repeated things and do the kind of investigation. Sometimes what we'll do is we'll send a chemist to your lab to do it. We'll send one of our chemists to work with you to help you get better at it, find out why you're different. Again, not from an accreditation standpoint, but just from a helping standpoint. Because again, our goal too is to get everybody doing things comparable. There'll be time that you'd have to invest in that, but there's no dollar cost. And Christine said she'll pay for the shipment of samples, so nobody's got to cover that. So, timing. The plan is to conduct the next learning and calibration studies in March. The idea would be that we're looking to get results back from you about a month later, because what we're trying to do is get prepped for our regional monitoring program that starts in June. I will tell you, it doesn't always, this sometimes will drag on until August, September, December, as we're trying to work out differences and find out why things, and maybe do a rerun. But the goal is to get your samples somewhere in a March timeframe and get them back from you in April. We need to decide on matrices and analytes by February. Where are we going to sample? What are we going to sample? We're talking with SFEI. They thought it'd be kind of neat if we're going to do this, do a sample from the San Francisco Bay, as opposed to just one from Southern California. We're quite open to doing that, and they've already volunteered to work with us towards that. Right now, we're talking about doing fish tissue as well as sediment. But these are decisions we need to make by February, because we've got to get the field collection part going. And really what I want to get out of you today is, how can I modify this in a way that interests you, and how many of you would want to participate in this so we can start planning. That's my presentation.
Questions? Diane?
It's a 55-gallon drum that you process?
It's not, okay, so it's not actually a 55-gallon drum.
Well,
it's
okay.
But a container roughly of that size.
I guess my question is, at the risk of sounding like a punk, the sample's not really homogeneous. It's so you're taking into consideration particle size. Are you drying the sample first? Are you grinding the sample? When the sample arrives at the laboratory, is it already weighed out so that the laboratory does just that amount? Does the laboratory subsample it once the sample gets there? I have a million questions.
Okay, so I will answer the questions to the best extent I can, and then I may take advantage of people like Rich, who's a chemist, who's actually been doing even more of this than I have. In terms of the sample, the reason we do so much volume is we have found value in having samples that we can actually do across years. So the samples that we did in '98, I think we're just now starting to run out of those. But people do want to be able to look at samples, particularly as new laboratories come on. So that's why we do such a large volume. In terms of how we homogenize it, the bottom line is, have you ever seen one of those big bread makers? You know, it has like blades that are literally about that high, that far around. We have one of those.
Is it wet?
It's wet.
Okay.
Okay, so we do it while it's wet, and we do it, and then what we do at SWRCB is we do a series of subsampling where we process them before they ever get to you. And so we're looking
Is your
to
process ISO Guide 25 compliant?
What's that?
There's an ISO guide for the standards of doing this kind of work.
Okay.
ISO Guide 25.
Okay.
If you follow those procedures, you should be compliant to international standards on a performance evaluation.
So the answer is, I'm unaware of us following those, but I wouldn't mind.
Look it up and
What's
get
that?
on it. 'Cause
I would, if this is something that would help you all
If you're gonna
participate.
do it, Steve, you gotta do that.
Okay.
Because otherwise your non-standard procedure for performance evaluation samples.
Okay.
I have some other comments too, but
Okay.
there's a procedure for this.
Okay, so
Or a standard for preparing performance evaluation samples.
Okay.
And then also for calibration standards.
Mhm.
For example, what you saw at the beginning, in all probability, those labs all got together, like who's supplying your PAH calibration standards? Those guys need to be ISO Guide 25 compliant as well. So that's the traceability of the authentic, you know, hexaethyl death or whatever it is you're gonna be, you know, doing. So when you get there, then you'll be standard. You'll be standard
Okay.
in doing it.
So if what you're saying is us moving towards standard. it
Well,
would-
exercise a standard procedure or do a non-standard procedure, your choice. If you're
Okay.
standardized, you have some defensibility.
Mhm.
If you're not, you have none.
Okay. So if what you're saying is that moving towards that would help you all participate, then I need to find out a little bit more about what's in
On
there.
that subject, I think from the commercial lab standpoint, our customers already do this.
Okay.
The Army Corps of Engineers is all over this. They know what you're doing because they're ISO Guide 25 compliant. When they send us sediment samples for the analysis of it, they know how many other labs across the country have got it. So it's to us, it's, I mean, I don't want to speak for all the commercial labs, but I bet the farm that Cal Science and WEC did this because their customers want them to participate in your study. If their customers didn't, they wouldn't be there.
Okay.
I think it's ISO 34.
Oh, I stand corrected. My learned colleague over here would know more about it, but it's 34 and 25 is another one for calibration standards perhaps. But there are standards for the preparing of both calibration solutions and for performance evaluations.
Steve, I don't expect that's gonna be an insurmountable effort from the SWRC design team to review that, and you'll have to pay for it. Anything ISO, you have to pay like $100 fee or whatever it is. It ranges, but anyway, you have to pay for obtaining the file, and you can't distribute it. But after that, you could sit a team down together and probably look at your sample preparation protocol and adapt it to reflect that. So anybody that has questions about reproducibility will be settled.
Okay. I'm glad to look into it.
And the commercial labs would not look at this as a cost-free kind of thing. To us, it's just another tax.
So you're saying you wouldn't be excited to do it?
Speaking for my employers and for the 7 or 8 laboratories around the country that I'm responsible for, absolutely not interested.
Okay.
Because it's redundant to us.
Redundant with
Other programs that our customers would put together.
other programs that, again, speaking for why ELAP was interested, other programs that ELAP labs could participate in?
Well, if the ELAP labs wish to do it, that's all fine for them. For us, I mean, we're an ELAP lab, so, and our customers already subject us to this kind of scrutiny. So,
I think she was next.
Steve, David down here, when the next opportunity for question comes up.
All right, we've got Diane, then Mindy, then you, David.
Thanks.
We would be interested in doing it. Okay. So, and we do participate in the studies that he's talking about, so.
Okay. Are there any particular things that we could do to make it of greater value to you?
Well, we do a tremendous amount of incremental sampling and doing basically what you're talking about. So I'd like to see that procedure so that if we did vary, I know it's me and not you.
Yep.
That would be my biggest concern.
Yep.
I think, I mean, and again, I can't be speaking for the agency partners, but a lot of their concern, I think, on having this inter-lab, intercalibration type of study wasn't really directed towards the T&I labs that are already T&I or that already participate in these DoD programs and all of that. If they're more interested in saying they don't believe PT studies based off of the small wastewater, drinking water labs, this does nothing for any of us because it's sediments. And so none of our small labs or anything run any of these analysis. So if you wanted to really, to me, get to what I think would benefit ELAP and the agency partners to help their belief in our numbers and in the PT studies or whatnot, you need to be doing this with samples that are just plain drinking water or plain wastewater matrices. So
you're talking about water column samples?
that would be my suggestion, and my lab would gladly participate if you did that.
I'm seeing Steve wanted to comment on this.
And maybe just to comment on this comment, Mindy's comment. Context, yeah, because otherwise I'll be 4 down the road. And context is that there are laboratories, private sector, that do sediment analysis, that DTSC, as one example agency, is going to be very interested in getting a higher degree of confidence in that analysis suite. I concur that my perspective as a NELAP lab, those NELAP laboratories have such a level of scrutiny on them that sure, participation, choosing not to participate, already doing other things may check a box, but there's a whole variety of other laboratories that are not NELAP certified that are doing sediment analysis, submitting lower costs for that, winning bids, and the question is their work comparable to other laboratories? So I think from that perspective, there may be some value in the sediment but that's a smaller portion of ELAP certified labs compared to about 400 that are municipal or whatever is the number.
Right. There's nothing that prevents us really from doing a water column thing, and in fact, for nutrients, we do water column things. If we're going to do a cyanotoxin, we're still debating whether we're going to do it in muscle tissue or. But we could. The opportunity here, though, is in a sense. The exercise is kind of paid for already because we're doing it, so there's an opportunity to very cost effectively add on. If people find this of interest, then and then the value, if we have enough labs participating, I don't think it'd be very hard for us to set up in the future one that's based upon water column.
Okay.
So
David
was next. Yep.
Quick question: is any of this going to end up in the SWAMP database?
Probably. I'm looking at Gail saying yes. I mean, what we do is
Not the results of the intercalibration
not the
study.
results of the
They
intercalibration.
get reported to SWAMP though, right?
No, they get reported in the report from the pilot, the BITE projects. But
Okay.
the actual intercalibration data does not go into SWAMP. All the other monitoring data
Right, the
does.
monitoring data, the results from this does, but the intercalibration we keep blind because it's really to help the laboratories get to a good point.
That sounded like no.
That's a no.
Right, the intercalibration exercise does not get submitted to SWAMP. The BITE Regional Monitoring Program does.
It is because we put them in before.
Okay, well then, let me follow up with a second question, which actually isn't a follow-up question, it's just a parallel question. But it's kind of like what Mindy was pointing to. If there's a concern about the quality of data being generated by laboratories accredited by ELAP, and a concern that perhaps the current set of PT samples generated under WS and WP requirements are some way inadequate, then perhaps, and if SWRP wants to sort of look into that issue, which if that's important it is, then perhaps the first step would be to actually look at the existing data. I mean, there are providers, ERA, WIBI, all these firms, have all these studies. Why not just start with that data look at the data that people are generating for nitrate and arsenic and things in the admittedly simplified and homogenized universe of PT samples.
So again,
That might be an interesting starting point.
I'm going to put this slide back up for you and say that every one of the laboratories on the slide that's in front of you was ELAB certified.
And
every
PT sample.
Yeah, every one of them
And
passed
passed
PT samples. So,
And by the way-
and what we find is every time we bring a new lab on, we get results of this level.
And that's a matrix.
Right.
That's a matrix issue. So the Army Corps of Engineers, Missouri River Division in Omaha, they got data on this. And the guys, I think Denver, USGS, you know, they have data on similar types of stuff, you know, water testing, real world, bunch of laboratories that are contractors to them. And, you know, not a half a dozen labs, 30 labs. So the sample size is meaningful, the results are meaningful. You know, there are data that David's referring to that exist out there to look at. But it's a good point, I think, if my colleagues in the agency communities like Bruce understood, you know, just what the uncertainty is between laboratories, particularly for something as simple as total petroleum hydrocarbons. You know, that's, you could be any, you know, you're all over the map there, just like the original study you got here.
Yeah. All right, Gail, then Stephen, then Bruce.
Okay, so first, I think all of the PT vendors now have sediments for the standards methods, right? In PTs in sediment for the more conventional analytes, 8270. Like one of the PT vendors I use, they offer sediment PTs.
There are SRMs of sediment material, yes.
Yeah.
NIST has them.
Yeah, and some of the commercial ones just call them PTs.
ERA.
Yeah, exactly. So we participated in some of the SWRCB and SFEI studies. The most valuable information was on the analytes where there are no analytes available and matrices that are unusual. So that's where the comparisons are enormous. Pyrethroids, it'd be great if you did do the algal blooms, because that's like the Wild West right now. PAH metabolites, you know, some of the more unusual compounds is where this program would be really valuable.
And we have some flexibility. So right now, what we're thinking about is domoic acid in sediments.
That's pretty good.
Again, to make this work, you need a number of labs to participate because we don't know what truth is. We only know what essentially multiple labs are doing. And so we've got to get up to half a dozen to 10 labs to make it worthwhile. For domoic acid, we have several already who said they want to participate. So again, that's the beauty. If this group were to say, we want to do that, then we'll make that happen. You had a list, you had an order.
Yeah, I'm in support of these types of projects because I think that they provide some context that isn't necessarily out there on the street on a broader scale. We participate in the toxicity end of things, and we've seen some huge differences in the results, and then SWRCB worked diligently to refine those, to work with a technical group to try to refine why there were differences and to harmonize the laboratories. At least on the toxicity end of things, I do have to say that one of the reasons we participated was to bid on the work, but we participated in a lot of intercalibration exercises that were outside of EPA and USGS driven to improve methods. And my expectation, I could be wrong, and the analytical chemists in the room can tell me if I am, is that the same issues that go on in toxicity testing in terms of parameters that can drive differences among laboratories probably are result in interlaboratory differences among analytical labs. And what we found is it's kind of this hush-hush, let's not discuss it type of thing in the industry, rather than being open and discussing it and working collectively to resolve it. And that's where there's definite value in the SWRCB process. I think that the challenges that we would run into is, and I'll use bad labs just as a kind of in quotes, is that a bad laboratory is not going to participate in this. Primarily what you have participating in this were parties that were interested in potentially bidding and doing the work, but either were good laboratories or became better at doing the science and sought to improve Lab 1. And so at the end of the day, some of the concerns from the regulatory agencies, partners.
What you're saying is we won't really have that because we'll have that for a subset of labs that are pretty good.
Yes, and I think primarily those that are interested in improving or evaluating where they are will choose to. Those that don't want to kind of get out there on the street, that would probably end up staying anonymized. They would say, no, I still want to be Lab B.
Right.
Nobody will know. And then the last scenario is, okay, so now you get labs to participate beyond those that are in the queue already, because I know there are a bunch already having meetings, and you get, let's say, half dozen more labs, and some of those laboratories don't have good performance and some do. How does that, and you have your hand up next, Bruce, so how does that address the state agency partners' concerns? Because just from that first slide alone, right, where we had data, you're going to see probably some of those laboratories are not going to be very good. And so then what? So context as it relates to the end product and how it would relate back to ELAP is of interest to me. So a question directed towards you and then to you as well.
First of all, of course, we're interested in my 2 labs, and as well as other ones, if you're interested in like the non-targeted screening with GCQ-TOF or LCQ-TOF or PFAS, toxins, furans, etc.
We're not going to do that.
Darn.
I'd love to do that, but we're not going to do that.
Maybe in the future.
In the future.
But which gets to, I am interested in variability and recognizing that these labs, it's extra work for a lab to participate in this. It's not necessary a lab that's trying to call it a low budget, or having, minimizing their costs, very likely won't. For me, it's important to understand the variability. Even if you say, give me the 10 really good labs that are really trying, they want to work with SWRC, get funding, and participate in the SWRC, testing. It's nice to know if they're, and then they go through and do successive experiments to try and find out, problems, and still, if there's still a certain variability of 30% or 40% for PAH, and say 30% for pH is 25%, that's good to know, because then how can anyone expect a number that's plus or minus 25, 30, even 40% to be bad if the really good labs really trying, talking to each other, sending samples back and forth can only get within 25, 30%. It gives me some good scientific information. I'm not saying you have to be perfect. I want to know the best you can get. That's the, in a sense, the best. It's an estimate of the best. So to me, that's of value. And also there's a bias, bias in the sense of this doesn't give you the bias in the sense of, well, I guess give you a distribution. Does it tend to be most are up high and if some are down low? Does it tend to be a scatter? What's the distribution look like? We sort of give you some feelings. So to me as a scientist, being able to advise, hey guys, we don't expect these labs to be perfect. Don't expect these 2 numbers for these labs differ. So there's the same number.
Same number.
The example would be if you look at the SWRCB methods, they tend to, in the back of the method, have what EPA did back in the 1990s. I think David Kimbrough coordinated a study back when he published it on PCBs, for example, and I think on metals, where it shows the interlaboratory variability. It's pretty big. And there were samples that have been done and published, but there's EPA methods of sediments and other real matrices. That's good to know. So I tell my folks in the regulatory programs, hey guys, this is what you can expect from 2 different labs. So I think this is valuable, and the sediment to me is a good model. It's a good one we can use. And the idea of going with other matrices in the future, water column samples, drinking water samples, again, it gives a better feeling. What's the reality? So that's sort of my view of this. Let's see if there's any other things I was thinking of. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. So I think it can be valued.
There's another part of this that's very valuable as well, and that is it's an iterative process. So your lab runs the samples, you get together with the other labs that are running them, you talk about what number you got and how you got it. A great example was we did some stormwater stuff a while back now, and TKN, which is a fairly straightforward method, I would assume. I don't know. I don't do it, but the labs were all over the place, and they got together and in their discussions realized they're all following the method, but there's a length of time to do that digestion. And once they realized they normalized the length of time to do the digestion, they were all right on the same number. So it also needs to have that iterative process in the system as well.
and this is Bruce again, to follow up on what Rich said, a value of this with that iterative process is it helps identify the critical points of error in the system, such that that can be, continuous improvement process, it can be corrective action, but it also just as a regulator get us recognizing what do we have to discuss with potential, or should labs be discussing with each other, a client discuss with a lab. To me, that's valuable information, not just the results, but as you're saying, iterative, it's really source of error identification, critical error identification. That's a very good point, Rich.
When there's a chance, I get in the queue?
Yeah, after Renee.
Oh, thanks. This is Renee. I also want to say that from my experience, oftentimes labs are the go-between between the regulated community, say dischargers, let's say, MPDS permitted dischargers. And so I don't think this is going to eliminate a bad lab, because bad labs, like Stephen said, won't want to participate. And maybe they don't offer, maybe the smaller labs, like Mindy said, there would only be, say, the water column they would be interested in those types of analyses. But it gives the labs that are participating, I think, greater confidence. They then relay that to their customers. And eventually we sort of have an understanding, or I guess maybe a comfort in knowing that if a lab relays certain information, we really do have confidence that that is a good thing, that they've been given good information, versus some labs that may not be quite as upright. And so I don't see how any lab could lose, and I think the aspect of the camaraderie, or at least the sharing of information, has to be a huge boost in how they do business.
All right, David and Steve.
Yeah, Bruce mentioned a study we did actually quite some time ago in conjunction with ELAP, interestingly enough. We did look at PCBs in soil at 5 different concentrations. A couple of, I think 300 labs were involved in the study, or 200. And what we did was we didn't just look at the results. We looked at which methods they used, what kind of instruments they used, solvents. And it wasn't that there were some labs that were good and some labs that were bad. The problem was some of the approved methods didn't work as well as other approved methods. So you can take the approved method and apply it exactly correctly and not get the right results. And so it's, I don't want this to devolve into who's good and who's bad, when the methods themselves have a lot of inherent limitations. Certainly one of the things we discovered was if you're using an electron capture detector, plaques build up real quickly, and a lot of instrument drift occurs very, very quickly. So labs that were in calibration on the first sample weren't in calibration on the last sample. And there's no requirement to burn out your ECD detector after each run, which might be optimal, but that certainly extends the life of the time involved in analysis. Same thing, for example, hexane's an approved solvent for extracting PCBs from soil, but it's not very polar, and as a result doesn't do as good a job as dichloromethylene. But both are approved. Labs are allowed to use both, and hexane has certain economic advantages. So the lab that was using hexane isn't going to do a good job at high concentrations, but they're still allowed to do it. So my point is, you can follow the method exactly perfectly and be a really good lab and still not get the results properly.
Right, so Dave, I want to reinforce what you're saying at 2 levels. I mean, level number 1 is, I think that is one of the greatest values of what we do. So you were mentioning before, like the EPA method validation studies. We've been involved with those. We have multiple labs to validate an individual method. This is different because we're not telling people which method to use or how to implement it. We're saying, you receive a sample, what's the variability, and then we get back together and talk. And if all the groups that are using either too small or using a small volume have different results than people using a large volume, or people using one solvent get different answers than somebody, it leads to a better understanding of the methodology and how you can make it consistent. The second thing that you talked about is exactly the difference between this first round and this final round. Is at some point you're going to realize there is a limit to how similar labs are going to be. And that's one of the things that the clients ask for. What is the limit of how similar? And when I see a 25% difference in concentration between an affected area and unaffected area, should I put much stock in that? Having this information helps them a lot with that. So I'm agreeing with you, Dave. It's just a matter of whether this is the right vehicle to get that information.
All right, Stephen, Bruce, and then I think we need to move on because we're behind schedule.
One other reason I support these types of studies is for methods for which there are either known challenges in the industry or a new method or a new analyses that you're trying to launch. I don't know if domoic acid is a standardized protocol that everybody does through similar protocols, but I assume not. And a similar concept that we were dealing with was an amphipod test that parties were just citing an EPA acute manual and saying it's in the back of the manual, it tells you how to do it. It did not. And I was banging my head here for 5 years because that was being said from certain regulatory agencies, federal, and it was just not factual. And the SWRCB had the Stormwater Monitoring Coalition in Southern California do a similar exercise. And in fact, sure enough, exactly what I was said was going on with an amphipod. Everybody can do it their own way, and the results were all over the place. And similar to this slide, by having the laboratories get together, meet, agree to a round two, harmonize as best as possible protocols, still with some flexibility, the results were tremendously consistent. What it also showed was a particular protocol that is very common in permits throughout California, is one of the most variable methods and has not improved in 30 years. And so there's potentially some next steps there. So anything where there's something new that's coming out, DMA, and or the ELAP, Bruce or others say, hey, this would be helpful. These are some questionable protocols we have. If SWRCB can be convinced to integrate them or they're already on the docket, there's tremendous value in seeing how the laboratory variability fleshes out.
All right, Bruce.
And you could pick, like what the Army Corps used to do is send matrices that they knew were going to give the labs a hard time. You know, there's a high sodium sediment and you're doing metals. This is an issue. Or it's freshwater sediment and that is no issue at all. So, you know, when you get down to this, there is value for the individual matrix, but fundamentally it's about, I think when we first did this with petroleum hydrocarbons, the variability at the action level in soil was plus or minus 500%. You know, so, and it will show up a lousy method, you know, which petroleum hydrocarbons pretty much is.
All right, so I think just to summarize, Steve, it sounds like there is interest on the part of some people, but the ELAP labs and the ELTAC labs aren't driving the ship. I think it would be one of, you know, if you want to open it up, that's great, and Christine can pass the info along to labs who can participate or not participate.
So let me summarize what I think I've gotten out of this, all right? What I've gotten out of this is, number one, this would be even more valuable if we did a water column matrix. So I saw a lot of people nodding their head, Mindy. I'm not willing to do that at this time. Not that I'm not willing to do it in the future, but we have an opportunity that is just a jumping off opportunity, so we'll stick with it. Second thing I heard is put some of the ISO protocols into this. I'll have more confidence in it. I have to look into those. I'm guessing from what Steve said that it's not going to be that hard, and there's very little downside in doing that, which is
just real quick. You don't have to do the calibration standard he's talking about because all those labs purchase their standards from, you know, certified suppliers. So
the sample prep type stuff.
We didn't make up our own standards for these exercises.
Yeah, I would.
Let's skip that detail.
Wait, right, we don't want to get back into the weeds here.
Yeah. Well, what we're going to do, I'm going to promise to you, is I'm going to look into what those standards are and then move towards and if we don't move to that, it would be because I can find some good reason. Why not? I think that's a good thing. Third thing I heard is that there are labs that are interested in doing it. I heard your lab, I heard your lab, and what I need to do is find a mechanism for, I guess I'll call it communication, because you're not the only labs, and then I'll need to get for the labs like you who said, yes, I need to find a way to onboard you. So I don't know, Andy, I'll let you finish up, Christine, how we'll do that. Is that an email out or something? And then the fourth thing I heard is doing more novel chemicals is of greatest interest to this group. In which case, I kind of need a mechanism for you telling me what those are. And I'll tell you, what I'll do is I'll put forward to you, you know, any chemical that you want to do out of these sediments or these fish tissue which we're collecting that you can give me 6 labs that want to do it, we'll do. And if it's domoic acid in particular, I already got 3 labs that said yes.
And how about opening this up to other suppliers?
When you say suppliers?
Well, you're making performance evaluation samples. There are other people who make this, so you could, you know, why does SCORP have to do this?
Because we're already doing it.
Yeah. And if
They're
it comes
offering to do
under,
it for free.
Yeah.
no, well, if it comes under the auspices of ELAP, it should just, open it up to some of the guys back east who do this.
Who's gonna pay for it?
Yeah. And then that way it runs the cost down.
So, I mean, that's then you're not taking advantage of essentially that cost savings opportunity.
Possibly. Or we're opening it up to competition, which could be a cost saving thing.
Well, but the context is
That's
they
fine, that's
have
fine
to,
too.
they have to do that as part
I
of,
got it.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm just making a point.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you that this is not a question of whether we're going to do it or not do it.
I got it.
Okay, and if ELAP decides this isn't what they want to do, and LTAC wants to make a recommendation to them that this is not something you should do your own independent of SCORP, I'm not going to be insulted, my
Yeah.
life will go on. You're welcome to do that. I
I'm
think
kind
the
of
question
wondering
is
why ELAP's involved in this.
because their clients have said, we are aware of this, and we want to know how bad it is. And they've said it loud and clear, multiple
I
times.
think you've heard the enthusiasm from both the agency partners.
All right, and Gail has been
Yeah.
doing this with her hand, even though I said no more
One
30
more-
seconds.
One more wish list for you, Steve.
Uh-huh.
As for an agency, and we're asking a laboratory to do something unusual, it would be nice if we could have something that we could say, this is a CRM we want you to include. So if you could produce something that could be like a CRM that we could request, once every 5 years isn't frequent enough.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in, for a lot of what we do, we're responding to something that's a one-off. But yet we still need to have confidence in what was being generated and reported to us. So the ability for us to say, go to SCORP or go to SFEI, request CRM number PAH or pyrethroid, whatever, for tissues, and make sure you report that with your data. That
So
would-
you're saying put a requirement on that people also process the CRM?
Yes.
We have done that in the past. People have not found all that much value out of it.
Hmm.
Yeah. But I'm willing to entertain doing that again. Rich, you know, you've been more involved. I mean, we've done CRMs as part of this.
We do an intercalibration study at the beginning of the program, but as QA throughout the program, we switch to CRMs, commercial CRMs.
And we keep track of that, so.
Yeah.
Let's talk offline.
Okay.
That's not that hard to do.
Okay.
Okay, ready to move on?
Well, he had a question about how to get the information out, so email from ELAP to,
I would think ELAP putting something together and just letting people know that SCORP is doing this, if they're interested in participating.
Well, I mean, you have a list of which labs are certified in sediment methods and whatnot. So, I mean, it seems like making sure that you target those people to say, hey, this is available, are you interested?
Okay, so maybe I can work with you to develop an email that has enough description, without going into too much detail, so they won't read the email.
I mean, my personal take is in terms of all the things that's on ELAP's plate at this point, this is somewhere off beyond the dessert in terms of the importance of doing it for ELAP. But I think the ELAP just taking the step of sending something out to all of the sediment accredited labs saying, here's a program, if you're interested in it, here's your contact person.
Okay.
All right,
all right, thank you.
moving on. Sidwest Prime.
And if I could take a few moments first to introduce the topic and Paul, who's going to be doing the presentation. I introduced myself when the meeting opened. I'm Betsy Lichty with our Division of Drinking Water Quality Assurance Section. And Paul's going to be giving you an update on our success with rolling out lab to state reporting for lead data this summer, and going to be talking about some other directions that we're going to be going. I don't know the makeup of the laboratories that are represented here, but if you are working nationally, you know that US EPA has adopted a rule called CHROMAIR, and that is the cross-media electronic reporting rule. We are required to implement our own processes to make sure as we intake electronic data that those electronic signatures are validated through some process. So the path that we're going to be undertaking, of course, lab to state did not resolve that because lab to state is not CHROMAIR compliant. So I just wanted to take a few moments to introduce you to our plan to transition into the use of EPA's tool called CMDP. Remind me what that stands for? Compliance Monitoring Data Portal. Thank you. Compliance Monitoring Data Portal. It's going to be about a 1-year path for us to get there. We have some steps along the way to do that. And one of those steps is going to include regulatory changes to the data reporting format for drinking water analyses. Right now, we have somewhat old regulations that refer to EDF format. And we're trying to revise statutes so we can be flexible. I heard, flexibility in ELAP regulations, so it's not strictly listing fields of testing. So we want to do that also with the data reporting format for drinking water data. And we have a new team here in Division of Drinking Water that's dealing with that. So myself here with Quality Assurance Section, Jim Stites, who many of you have met or talked to, has retired. Paul Williams just stepped into his place December 1st and was up here first on Monday, coming from our Hollywood district as the district engineer there. And he's had an interesting first week, bringing some of his family up, and his first 2 days we had a data nerd meeting talking about our water quality data intake and all the information we take into SWRCB and into our WQIR, how we're going to re-envision that. And he's also been honored by being presented with the Superior Accomplishment Award by our water board for his work in developing WQIR, which is what all of the laboratories are reporting our drinking water data into right now. So Paul has a lot of background with data, and with the progress, with the vision that we have for moving into CMDP, CHROMAIR compliance, and also into SWRCB Prime, we have some tasks ahead of us, and we want to partner with the laboratories and other stakeholders because it's going to be a lot of change for everybody. So I just wanted to introduce that topic, ensure that we want to be invited back to share our updates with you, and then to introduce Paul and let him go ahead with his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Betsy. Kind of took away my introduction, but thank you for
Well,
the
I had to do it for
overview.
you.
So I'm Paul Williams. I'm the SWRCB unit manager. And I think it was probably earlier this summer that Jim Stites was here giving you an update. So I'm kind of taking off from where he gave an update. And since I'm new, I brought my trusty staff engineer, Janan Lee, with me, just in case there's some questions that I can't answer, being that I'm new. And being as good as she is, she showed me my first slide has a mistake already. So instead of State Drinking Water Information System, it should be Safe Drinking Water Information System. So thank you, Janet. So I'm going to go through the current process. This is probably very familiar with you all already. EPA created SWRCB for states to maintain information for public water systems that they regulate. In particular, it is for inventory information such as the system name, population served, connections, that kind of information. It's also used to track violations and enforcement actions, and also water quality data and schedules. So one thing to note though is that in California, we're not fully implemented in CIDWIS. We currently use CIDWIS for inventory and violations and enforcement action records only. We just started to implement it for water quality data reporting. So there's currently 3 ways in which laboratories can report data to DDW. The first is the Water Quality Management Portal, which we call WQM. And this allows laboratories using LIMS or the Write-On software to transmit data using the electronic deliverable format. The data from WQM goes to WQIR, which stands for Water Quality Inquiry. The R is the replacement of the program that happened a couple years ago. And that's really for field staff to use to query water quality data and to set monitoring schedules. The second way to have labs transmit data is to use the Lab to State portal. And that LTS, as we call it, is connected to CIDWIS. And that allows laboratories to use CSV files and provide the data using the electronic drinking water reports format. Data from the LTS portal goes indirectly into CIDWIS, and I say indirectly because that requires our staff to go in and unfortunately do visual manual validation steps that are not built in. So unfortunately it's a waste of time sometimes to do that manual process. Not the best way to do it. But we're trying to get implemented into CIDWIS, so we rolled that out this summer, and it's only being used for lead and copper data results. So currently there's 29 labs that are registered and using Lab to State. Out of the 1,331 water systems that conducted lead and copper monitoring this summer, 486 water systems, which is about 40%, used laboratories that submitted data via Lab to State. The third and last way that data is provided is either by email or snail mail. And this is the current method for all the bacteriological data that we get, including water distribution system data. And I put chlorine residuals, I really meant to say more about color, odor, turbidity, things in the distribution system, even nitrite samples for nitrification sampling, things that the water systems are bringing to the labs to have analyses for. And of course for treatment plant data as well. So here's a diagram that kind of roughly depicts the 3 ways that I just mentioned. The top path talks about pretty much the bulk Title 22 constituents that laboratories can submit information to us. That includes the inorganics, VOCs, SOCs, radionuclides, secondary MCLs, and the disinfection byproducts. And so that pretty much goes through WQM and then into our WQIR database. The middle path is where labs can use the Lab to State to transmit lead and copper data, which ends up into the CIDWIS database. And of course, the last method on the bottom is submitting data via email, which ends up at all the district offices throughout the state. The future of what we want to do and what Betsy highlighted is the Compliance Monitoring Data Portal, the CMDP. So what we envision is to have one line of all data going straight to CMDP, and that would end up in CIDWIS. So it's planned to roll out CMDP, I know Betsy said 1 year, maybe 1 to 2 years, but the earlier the better. The portal is it's a recently developed tool. EPA developed it for laboratories to transmit data directly to SIDWIS. So I highlight directly because there's built-in validations with CMDP where staff is not having to visually validate or manually look at a lot of this data. It'll go straight into our database, which is very ideal. And then in the near future into SIDWIS Prime, and I'll talk about that in the next couple of slides. So CMDP, as Betsy mentioned, is Chrome compliant. It pulls laboratory inventory data directly from SIDWIS. So on our end, we would make sure that SIDWIS has the inventory of laboratories, contacts, address, certification number, what methods they're certified for. And as long as we have that in SIDWIS, that would automatically update CMDP. It allows labs and water systems to request updates to their own profiles. So using CMDP, you can send a request, the SIDWIS unit will get it and make that change. Maybe the lab moved, or maybe there's a contact change, something to that effect. So with up-to-date profiles, it allows CMDP to properly validate samples at the time the data is submittable. CMDP uses proprietary XML schema. It doesn't support the EDWR XML schema. There's going to be 3 ways to use CMDP to report data. You could have the web services where labs can essentially have their LIMS system provide all the information to CMDP directly. There's a way to have XML files generated by using the CMDP Excel templates. And then there's the direct data entry using web forms. The data validations will be built into SIDWIS Prime, so it'll ensure that the lab has a valid ID, associated name and contact, and that there are standard method names and codes built in. There will be an analyte method pairing to ensure this particular analyte is covered under these particular methods. Lab analyte method association to ensure that the lab is able and certified to run that particular method and analysis. It'll have the dates of certification, and there can be other state-specific validations built into it as well. So it's planned to roll out SIDWIS Prime in 2 years. SIDWIS Prime is basically the overhaul of the current version of SIDWIS. EPA expects to roll that out in mid-2018. We will not be ready to use it by that point in time, but it should be available by mid-2018. And it's a cloud-based architecture supported by EPA. So you'll see in the diagram here, we're Xing out SIDWIS and making the transition to get into SIDWIS Prime. So with that, there will be training that we will need to develop and make sure that all the laboratories are brought on board and understand how to use CMDP. So that's kind of the brief overview of SIDWIS Prime transition and where we're at now. I don't know if there's any questions we can answer.
Questions for people from up here?
I would like to ask a question. Do any of the laboratories represented here already report via CMDP for water systems in other states that use it?
Yes.
Yes.
You do? Okay. That was 2.
Any questions from Southern California?
Yeah, this is Miriam. I just have a couple of questions. So first, are you guys, DDW, still sticking with implementation by rules, like was stated at the last meeting when they talked about the subject? I have another question afterwards.
So implementing these new programs?
Yeah, so first it was the lead and copper rule, and then I believe it was the revised total coliform rule is the next rule to be implemented. Is that correct?
Well, I kind of view that as maybe a little bit a different topic where those are regulatory packages that basically like the revised total coliform rule is the state of California needs to adopt the federal regulation that was passed. We are implementing the federal RTCR.
I think she means implementing him into civics prime.
Into civics. Okay. Yeah, so that is a very good question, and that's something that the transition team, which was just formed and just met the last 2 days, really needs to make a lot of decisions on. We're not sure what the next rule that may be rolled out, but that will be coming. Decisions will be made soon, and I'm sure ELTAC will be updated at that time.
And if I could, you specifically mentioned RTCR, and I'm sure when Jim was here, he probably mentioned that, and at the time, that was an easy goal and target for us to establish, because it's an area of data that we're not receiving it electronically. We really want to get that data electronically. The problem right now is that it's going to be very difficult to implement that via the lab to state process, which is I believe what both Jim and I thought we could do. And it's because of the lack of validation within the program and the need for our staff to either program validation procedures or manually validate. With the volume of coliform data we receive, that would be just a huge task. So we need to think more about how we're going to roll out the different rules based on some schedule to be developed by our new data integration team.
My second question has to do with how you are going to start training. Are you going to make a general announcement, or are you going to pick certain labs to be like the prototype for implementation?
Yeah, I think we will be selecting several labs to do a prototype and make sure that we all know how it works before we provide the training.
Okay, thank you.
I did have a question. On the upcoming model where it's going to be based on like the Excel, you have the Excel templates?
Yes.
Will that be similar to what those of us who run both drinking water and wastewater, we currently do through the wastewater, like the CWIX uploads? Is that similar, or you don't know that
I'm
one?
not very familiar with CWIX.
Okay.
It's actually an Excel template, and I think you can expand it and include as much data as you want, and you click a button.
It creates a zip file, and then we upload it. That's how we do the current one. That's
What
exactly
it creates,
that.
I don't know, but
Okay.
it would create something that could be uploaded.
Okay, that's, okay.
Sorry to be so vague.
No, that's fine. And then my other question is, I think if you go back one or two more slides, okay, one more behind that, yeah. So on this one, you do have DVPs that are going through the WQM. Currently, like for my water system, our DVPs do not have assigned codes to where we still have to, do the snail mail report.
Okay.
And so is that something that, which our engineer, they've obviously known about this for years and everything, and
Right.
we keep even the ones we send out, part of the HAA's part we send out, and every month or every quarter they try to do an upload, and they're like, okay, the state still won't accept it. I'm like, we know, but,
Yeah, that doesn't sound right. It really should, as long as you have what we call the PS code, that those are established.
and I think that's the problem, is that not
They're
all.
established, every district has an established.
Yeah, that's okay. So I just want to make sure we're still okay with where we are.
Yeah, which district?
We're out of, San Francisco. Sorry, Bob.
No problem.
I just want to make sure that we're still doing it okay. I mean, I hate to put more work on my regulator, but, you know, if there was a way for us to do it that way, we'll
Well, that's
gladly
the goal.
do it.
That's the goal, is every
Okay.
bit of data going this route.
Yeah.
Just take one.
Because the other thing that I found is, right now with the UCMR4 coming up, you have to go in, each water system has to go in and put in their DVP sites as entries into that, and you have to go in and create a code. And I contacted our regulator going, okay, am I supposed to just make up a code, or does something exist? And he gave me one, he goes, you know, we have these somewhere in the system that I think may be the ones somewhere down the line that are gonna tie in. He goes, if you wanna use these, he goes, but you're the only water system who has even asked for these, so.
That's been actually a
I
really
don't-
confusing topic where
Yeah.
EPA has their codes and the state of California has their codes. They really don't match.
Talk, yeah, okay.
And so, and it's good
Okay,
that they
good.
don't, because there could be problems with overlapping numbers if the labs are using those numbers thinking, oh, it's for this or for that.
Yeah.
So it is different.
Okay, so yeah, I can't wait till we get to
But it also
this.
actually creates potential issue for UCMR4 for labs that want to piggyback, or not labs, utilities that want to piggyback their stage 2 compliance monitoring with their UCMR4. If things aren't named exactly the same, it means the labs need to do double work even if they do single analysis.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's between the labs and the utilities to work out.
Yeah.
All right.
I, for one, can't wait for this, to make it all a simple system. Bring it on.
I'll be retired before this is real.
Pessimism, Andy.
All right. Moving on.
Thank you very much.
Eric.
And Mike. Try it again.
Oh, yes.
There we go.
It's on a different document.
Is this the handout that we have?
Hi, buddy. I'm Eric Nicolino. I'm from Division of Drinking Water and Regulatory Development Unit. Here with an overview on the perchlorate DLR review. This project was basically stems from our annual review of MCLs. So every 5 years, an MCL is supposed to be looked at to see whether or not it should be revised. In 2016, basically, perchlorate came up on the list, and we found some limitations, and it was all about the DLR. So we struck up a project with ELAP and ELTAC, and this is the preliminary work, or some of the preliminary work, or at least the overview of it. Okay, quick outline, sources of perchlorate, regulation of perchlorate in California, what the current regulation is, that is. Limitations with the detection limit, which is 4 ppb. What resulted from the staff recommendation and the board, and basically it ended up becoming a board approval, so I'll explain that. The partnering with ELAP and ELTAC. ELTAC members were basically Andy, David, and Miriam, just like you know. And then a quick summary. So sources of perchlorate, manufacturing, typically propellants and rockets, missiles, fireworks, found in some imported fertilizers from Chile, naturally occurring according to one of the sources that we had. So atmospheric deposition, but over long periods of time, and it's usually below the public alcohol. Impurities present in the hypochlorite solutions, so in disinfection processes, it's possible to be introduced into water. And so where we usually see these at are usually cleanup sites, manufacturing, testing, disposal practices. That's where we usually see these, the heavy concentrations of perchlorate. The regulation of perchlorate. So the MCL was established in 2007, and it's at 6 parts per billion, still is at 6 parts per billion. And the DLR is at 4 ppb. Now, in 2015, the public health goal was revised from 6 to 1. So based on our health and safety code, it requires us to get our MCL as close as possible to the public health goal while considering cost and technical feasibility. So, to the next slide here really quick. So the thing is, what we found was there was a limitation with our DLR. We didn't want to try to even look at the MCL without knowing whether or not we can get closer. Because if not, we would have been limited by the DLR at 4 ppb. We wanted to find out if we can get lower. So the limitations kept us from being able to evaluate whether or not existing systems were able to reduce below 4 ppb, or at least fall. I mean, we're falling somewhere between 1 and 4, and we weren't sure where it was. So we were not able to see below the cusp of 4. So occurrence data and water sources, you know, it was really nice because the occurrence data and water sources were below 4 ppb in water that was being distributed. Just like I said, we just couldn't figure out what it was. So we also couldn't identify the additional health protection that people may have been getting. Again, this goes back to looking at the technical, more of the technical feasibility than the economic feasibility, because we wanted to see how low we can go. So this is pretty funny because we brought this to the board the day after the 4th of July. So, you know, with all the fireworks and everything going off, I think it was appropriate. So what we recommended to the board was we asked them if we could take a look at the DLR before we attempt looking at the MCL. What we said is that we would introduce a regulation package that would attempt to lower the DLR from the current concentration, try to get it as close as we could to the public health goal, which is 1 ppb. I'll remind you guys of that. If appropriate, we develop a second package to revise the MCL. So we went to ELAP, asked them what methods they certified for, and it was 314.0, 314.1, 331, and 332. There are about 50 labs that were certified for 314.0. Okay, and from looking at our database, the majority of the uploads, we realized that most labs were using 314.0. So that was our starting point. So through ELAP, we connected with ELTAC. David, Andy, and Miriam were gracious and helped me or helped us develop a survey. So the goal was, again, looking at how close or how low a DLR we can get out of using method 314.0. We gave that to ELTAC, at least the 3 members. They set up our survey for us. They defined the laboratory parameters, and we got some preliminary results. I'll say this off the cuff anyways, because for the preliminary results, the majority of labs could get down to about 2 ppb reliably. Other than that, I mean, it's still in question, and I'm still getting advice from Andy, David, and Miriam, so to see where we can go from there. We did have a follow-up perchlorate survey because we wanted to look at the other methods, the more advanced methods, which is 331 and 332. It seems to be that they would have no problem getting well below the public health goal, but it's just a matter of looking now at cost feasibility and whether or not they have the capacity to be able to handle more samples. Because the DLR, the one thing the DLR does, specifically for this contaminant, is it changes the frequency of monitoring. Once you have a detection, it goes from every 3 years for groundwater, every 3 years, every year for surface water, it'll move them from that frequency to basically quarterly. So you're looking at least 4 times in a year. And if they have treatment, if they have a treatment system, they're sampling within their treatment system. You know, so that's where it's left us, and we're still looking at it. And I'm hopeful that we'll have something close at the beginning of the year to bring to the board.
How many labs were accredited for those other 2 methods?
11 labs. Yeah. And so the thing is, they do have some overlap on the with the 50, of course. Andy's labs do all three.
I mean, most of the labs that are doing 331 and 332 are commercial. There are a few non-commercial. MWD is doing 331. But, you know, 314 is being done by a wide variety of utility and commercial labs. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so you're in the process of survey and evaluation with the goal of moving the DLR lower or having a protocol that can, a method that can achieve a lower DLR for the human health protection, right? So if in fact you find that there's just simply through the first method, the DLR is not low enough, it's not down at 1, you really need it below 1, that's right? Or you end up in the scenario that the other protocols, the pool of laboratories is so small, what's the next step from there? Because then putting in a regulation into place where there isn't a laboratory community that's sufficient to support the analyses is problematic. So have you guys looked that far ahead, or right now you're still kind of digesting information?
We're still digesting it. You know, you're right. Ideally, you would want that DLR to leave you some buffer between that and the MCL. So you definitely want to go below 1. That would be the best case scenario. Yeah, we're still looking at capacity. So we don't know what would happen if labs can actually handle more samples. I mean, now you're only looking at 11 labs. I don't know. Have to see still.
Does the toxicity data support a DLR of 1?
Well, the thing is, based on the public health goal, the thing is, we have to go with the public health goal. OEIs are, we have to. That's by the health and safety code. So we have to
the nice thing, Bruce, is that the DLR decision has nothing whatsoever to do with whether.
So it's no science involved.
No. The DLR has the science in terms of the analytical capacity, but it's unrelated to whether it's necessary.
Right.
And because OEHA has said public health goal of 1, California regulations say MCL must be as close to the public health goal as possible. The assumption is that OEHA is justified in their 1, and that's luckily a decision that ELTAC doesn't need to worry about. What we need to worry about is the whole issue of, can you reliably get to 1? And what we found, and Miriam and David can chime in our survey, was looking back at the framework that Stephen had written almost 2 years ago now for, how to evaluate a method, sort of provided us with a general concept of, okay, what are the parameters that we think are important to be able to establish it, and that's how we came up with the 2 ppb for 314. There are labs out there that can get down to 0.5 with 314, but not a lot of them.
Yeah, I posed a question.
David here, if I could chime in for a moment.
Yep.
Yeah, historically, when California's adopted MCLs in the past, they've used a formula that said they expect, I think it was 70% of the labs to be able to get accurate and precise results, which is a little vague. So what we did is we looked at the method, and the method requires, 314 requires that a laboratory validate their reporting limit, their MRL, at plus or minus 30%. So you're supposed to run a check sample at your lab's MRL and get plus or minus 30%. So what we did was we asked the labs, what's the lowest concentration you can get to in the MCT, which is the matrix, don't ask what the CNT stands for.
Matrix conductivity threshold.
Thank you, there you go. At different concentrations, and we found that at 2 parts per billion, we can get 80% or more of the labs to get plus or minus 30% at that concentration.
Yeah. So that file that was developed, I drafted it, but others chimed in, is pretty near and dear to my heart because of some challenges that I've seen in launching regulatory mandates for chemical analysis and toxicological analysis when laboratory capabilities weren't there. I believe what is in there, it's been a couple of years since I looked at it, is after doing this type of survey and ground truthing and then looking at the volume of work that would be needed, that if in fact there isn't a sufficient pool of laboratories to get that work done, and not just volume of work, but also passing the sniff test of capabilities is another evaluation that you may be doing. Is to not push forward with the mandate until, I think it said ELAP then distributes this is coming, we're going to need more laboratories. Is this something you would move forward with? So since you have this pool of labs that you've been communicating with, that if in fact it has to be lower and the pool's low, and the pool of labs is too low, that you move forward, ELAP move forward with the process of recommending capabilities development. I mean, we ran into this with the pyrethroids, and there just weren't laboratories that could do the limit. So I'm hoping that, I posed a question, but I'm hoping the next step after you finalize this last bullet item is, okay, yes, we have plenty of labs, or no, we don't. And if no, we don't, then you move forward with the process for recommending that laboratories, there's going to be a market, move forward with development of capabilities.
And it's a combination of two things. So it's not just the capacity; it's also the cost.
Oh yeah.
I mean, so the thing is, once you been reduced to from 50 labs to 11 labs. And not only that, you've lowered the DLR, and you've now boosted the number of samples that have been coming in. The boost of samples actually bring down the cost because the labs are performing more often. Two, how fast can labs come online? So ideally, again, it would be best to see how fast labs could come up. That would probably be the next way to go.
But even with doing that, I mean, we have absolutely no idea what the demand is going to be because we've all been reporting a non-detect at less than 4 or whatever the limit that we've been down to. So if we start to test down that low and then find out, okay, we do have issues that need to be tested at a much more frequent base, you could have, you could have a larger number of labs that are going to need a lot more of this testing also. So really until you're tested down to that level, you're not even going to know the true demand that you're going to have for this, I think. I mean, it's,
David here.
one step after another.
David?
Yeah, actually, I think we have a pretty good sense. I don't think there are actually a huge number of drinking water sources that are between 1 and 4. If you have perchlorate in your wells, you're probably already treating, either blending or treating, and so and if you actually look, some people have actually been reporting below 4, and they don't have to. So, there are some wells out there, but there's not going to be a huge number. So the capacity we have right now would probably meet whatever, additional. And it should be pointed out, lowering the DLR to 2 doesn't necessarily mean the MCL goes to 2. It just means it could, because it's, the other variables are cost, because it's basically a cost benefit. Can you, by lowering the MCL, do you increase public health protection? And that may or may not occur.
Can I interject for a moment?
Yeah.
Hi, it's Kate. So if you'll recall, this at the last ELTAC meeting, we formed this perchlorate work group based on a request from the agency partner. So the way we've kind of been thinking about it is a pilot run of that memo that you all drafted and approved a couple years ago, which is in your packet, the process for when an agency comes to ELTAC. So my hope, in addition to Eric giving you an update, is that we could possibly look back at this process and after having gone through this pilot, decide whether or not we need to make any adjustments here, because we're going to our agency partners and we're pitching this kind of thing to them and letting them know, like, you guys are here, you're a technical committee, you have new monitoring needs, come to us, we can help you, they can help you. So we want to make sure that this process is as efficient as possible, and now that we've been able to test it through this work group, if ELTAC can take a second look back at that and see with fresh eyes if there's any adjustments that you want to make. So that was a secondary goal of having this item on the agenda today.
I wanted to comment on that.
Yes,
the only thing is that we didn't get LTAC's approval for our survey. We just sent it out. So that's the only way that we differed from the memo.
But by default, the LTAC committee, LTAC supported the formation of the committee, and so I don't see that as an issue.
Right, and also what we anticipated, because we discussed this at our first sort of little work group meeting, was that we would be bringing information back to LTAC as a whole. So, you know, the one modification to the memo might be just clarifying that kind of thing.
So it sounds like we're in that item 4 range, and it doesn't. We're not there ready to make a determination if there are capable laboratories, because you're going back and getting more information. And so on the next LTAC meeting, it would sound like if in fact there is, you guys have a consensus on the concept, that you would draft the letter for LTAC to review at the next meeting, not you, but our committee, to review at the next LTAC committee. I feel like it's 5 o'clock and it's
Just
only
leave our
3.
committee and stop at the meeting.
Yeah, I think anytime I see that the meeting should be over, my brain just kind of shuts down. Anyway, so the committee would bring something back to LTAC for review that would be a draft letter that would go to the labs.
Right.
Okay.
So what kind of letter are we going to be approving that would go to the labs? The lowering the DLR, or?
I'll go ahead and shame on me for not even noticing it was on page 130 of a 133 page packet. It indicates here that the letter is to identify the problem, summarize the justification from the state agencies, request a determination of current capabilities, request a timeline for the development of the capabilities if they do not exist, and establish a timeline for return responses. And that would be that if it was decided that more laboratories or lower limits were needed from the labs.
And I think, you know, we sort of already know the answer to part of that, which is there's likely a need for more laboratories, whether it's 5 more laboratories or 50 more laboratories is probably something that our work group needs to discuss. I mean, I would give the analogy of EPA's unregulated contaminant monitoring program, where essentially there are about half a dozen labs that do 90% of the work across the country, with that being typically 35,000 samples spread out over 3 years, but really spread out over sort of 2.5 years. So I would argue that you probably don't need that many laboratories to do it. But that's something that I think our work group still needs to talk about. So, any other questions for Eric? Bob, you look like you want to say something.
I always want to say something. We do need to move toward 1, so, because that's our decision that we'll have to make. You know, whether we go back and tell the board we just need more time to find out the lab capabilities to get to 1, that's okay, but not getting to 1 doesn't help us, because this is just a DLR. We really have to make a decision on the MCL. The DLR just, we can't go forward without that, so.
Yeah, and I
1
think,
is the goal.
I mean, I think what our committee is, and again, David and Merritt, you can jump in if you disagree, but we've essentially, I think, already seen that if it's 331, 332, or 314.1, 1 is not an issue. If it's 314, there are some labs that can get down to 1, but not a lot. So then the question really becomes one of, do the limited number of labs that have said they can get down to 1 by 314, plus the currently certified labs for 331, 332, 314.1 provide enough capacity?
It seemed to me for scientific defensibility that a reporting limit of exactly at the protection value is not workable, because that RL is going to have some plus or minus depending upon the performance day in and day out of the laboratory. So it seemed to me that the reporting limit has to be less than the environmental protection criteria, and then your MCL, your MDL in the laboratory would be even lower than that.
Well, Actually, there are several DLRs that are equal to the MCL, carbon tetrachloride being one example. But you're right, ideally it should be, but in fact, it is the situation. And actually, you really need to be below that. For example, if you're blending, you have to be, if you're blending for treatment, your blending objective is going to be 80% of the MCL. If you can't measure below the DLR, below the MCL, getting to 80% of the MCL is kind of complicated. So, but with that said, the reason we're using this approach is there's two ways to do this. One is you can say, here's a DLR we want. Now all you labs, have to. It's a driver where you say, well, this is the DLR we want. You comply or get out of the business. But that's not what historically the drinking water program's approach has been. Historically, with MTBE, perchlorate, chrome-6, and arsenic, they said the DLR is where the majority of labs can get accuracy. So it's not been prescriptive, it's been descriptive. They simply assess what is existing capacity. So if they want, obviously the drinking water program, if they want to switch approaches, it's within their regulatory discretion to do that. But it would be a break from past precedent. So that's why the subcommittee took the approach it did, was to be consistent with what the drinking water program has historically done.
Yeah, but the thing is, I'm going to bring this up because this, the one thing that's unique about this is that this is an acute contaminant. So this is recognized as an acute contaminant. So setting the DLR and the MCL together in the same place without a buffer in between makes it very, very difficult. So it makes sense to break from the past, at least in regards to the type of chemical or the type of health concern that it had.
Well, no, actually, the previous perchlorate MCL used exactly the same approach, even though it was an acute toxin. Now, again, if you want to break with how you set the DLR for perchlorate in the past, that's obviously within your discretion. I'm just saying that historically, even for perchlorate, even for acute toxins, this is how it was done.
But I want to say that there are a lot of advanced technologies that analyze this method, and they may be a little bit more expensive than other technologies that cannot achieve the DLR, but it's my opinion that it's not so expensive to change over to the more advanced technology if this is an item of concern for public health.
Well, let me just add, there were a number of labs that could use 314 to get down to 0.5. So it's not a question of choosing one method over another. It's just a question of establishing a different approach to setting the DLR. If you wanted to right now, you could say DLR is 0.5, and there are labs using all three methods that could do that. But then there would be a smaller population of labs, and it would be a break with tradition.
So David, thank you for that historical perspective. That helps. And we're right now, this is just exploration, and totally appreciate this group. I mean, thank you, Christine, for getting us back going and everything. But because ultimately, it's going to be a cost. We have to make a cost benefit, not a cost benefit analysis. We have to make a cost comparison on this, and so we're just right now it's fact finding. And if you show us that it costs $7,000 for every analysis, obviously that we won't go there. But it's just something we have. More information up front will help us make a better decision down the road. So.
Okay, any other comments on this one? Maybe.
I just have one other comment for Caitlin, is that on this document, if we do make changes, we might want to change where it says the ELTAC committee to work group / committee, so it can be either or, and then you're covered on that respect.
Sure, and actually, since you gave me the floor, I will make sure everyone gets electronic copies of the 2 PowerPoints that are not included in the meeting packet, which are Eric's and Steve Weisberg's, and they'll also be posted online. So.
Okay. All right, moving on to last item, only 30 minutes late.
Thank you.
for having us.
I'd like to note that in one section of the agenda, it says we're done at 3, and another place it says we're done at 4.
Therefore, we're gonna be done at 3:30.
Yeah.
And I would have loved to have been done at 3, because I might have been able to make 4 o'clock flight.
Yeah.
But ain't gonna happen. All right, so in terms of reviewing stuff today, we really only obviously took one vote, which was the chairperson, and Christine will get back to us on that after reviewing things and going over them with Darren.
The 3 absent members submit their votes.
Oh, they're not.
No.
They're not voting?
No, but we'll tally the votes that we did get, and then Darren has the final say on the next chairperson, so we'll get with him on the results and then let everybody know.
Yeah.
So this time we will know who we voted for and who was picked by ELTAC? I mean, UAP?
Yes.
No,
What?
I'm confused.
no, because Miriam was asking, will there be a tally of the votes? Or will ELTAC get a tally of the details of the votes? And the
We
answer is
didn't do
no.
that the last time, we just
Right.
picked them up, we counted them up and we talked to Cindy Forbes and then we announced it.
No, last time we didn't get a tally.
Yes,
Right,
last time we didn't
right,
get a
that's-
tally.
We just announced it. is what-
Right,
Okay,
and
sorry,
so
I
it goes the
misunderstood.
same time, same way this time, which is Christine will send out an announcement. So that was the only actual vote we took. On the fields of accreditation, we had a lot of back and forth in terms of what we wanted to do there. And Jacob, I'm gonna toss it to you for a sec too. What would you like us to do for you?
Well, I think there was a lot of value.
Besides submit comments in terms of here are the problems that we see with it.
I think what I
What agenda item are we on?
We're on the close and review action items.
Oh, okay.
I think what I heard is that that process is very much tied to the fee work group, and so any information that you want to provide up front, we will currently take and evaluate, and as that other the fee work group continues to go to, I imagine that there will be additional updates.
Okay, everybody content with that approach?
Well, so that sounds like that the fee work group is going to determine the FOTs?
No, I think the point I was trying to make is that the final outcome of what these FOTs will look like it's not directly tied, but I would say indirectly tied into that process.
Well, I'll repeat the comment I made earlier. It's a little more complicated than that. If you want the FOTs not to be in regulation, then you can't tie the fees to them. Because then the fees are going to drive, the FOTs will drive the fees, and if the FOTs drive the fees, they have to be in regulation.
Well, and I think, David, it's Kate. Just based on conversations with our attorney, I think the idea is that we can define those things in regulation without necessarily having to list each specific method or specific FOA or specific unit of accreditation, and thus be able to charge a fee based on a unit or a field without having to specifically name the individual list.
Well, I think what the problem is going to be is if you by changing the number of FOTs and types of FOTs, you change the fees. As I mentioned, for example, using the ones proposed here, my fees go up by 33%. That has to be in regulation. Yeah, because otherwise you can just change fees whenever you want, and that has to go through the Administrative Procedures Act.
So again, this is Jacob, and I think what you're saying has value, and the more that you can put that in the way, and if you can continue to elaborate on that through maybe written comments, and that we can work with our legal team to ensure that we are doing it correctly, that would be most beneficial and helpful.
Sure.
Okay, so in terms of the fields of accreditation, everybody is free to submit comments directly to Jacob in terms of your thoughts. The fees work group, we heard from David on where that is, and there'll be another meeting sometime soon and a workshop sometime after that, and none of us know exactly when. The lab intercalibration exercises, I think Christine and Steve will work on that to just get info out to those people who want to participate in it. SWRCB Prime was strictly informational, so people know where we are. And perchlorate, we just beat to very low levels. Steve?
And know your next thing is going to motion to adjourn. What I don't have, but I expect that would be the case, I don't have a clear vision on a schedule for our meetings coming into next year. And I know a lot of that is, polls and things of that sort. It would be helpful to me to kind of see that staged out. And if Caitlin could maybe put out whatever surveys are necessary to get us scheduled through the full 2018, that would be great.
It'd be very helpful to me.
Yeah, because we have to schedule 8 meetings again.
8?
No, the bylaws call for 4.
Yeah.
Correct?
Was it 3 or 4?
3 or 4. So we are going to try and stick to that schedule.
We do want to make sure that you all know, though, that in terms of where our regulations package is, we want to make sure your meeting is scheduled appropriately, and so that's my hesitation in nailing down a full year's schedule up front. So
I'd recommend you simply have the last 2, since we're talking maybe summer, right? Based upon staff replacement and time and getting up to speed. Lock in the first 2, contingency hold dates for the last 2, and we can always modify them if necessary. So at least to put placeholders on calendars.
That's something on the calendar.
Yeah.
And then on a totally different note, I got an email question or text question that I just wanted to follow up on with the interim certificates. If a lab has an interim certificate and it's about to expire, is it on them to contact you to say, hey, this is ready to expire, or do they just wait and you will contact them?
right, they don't have to submit an application, it's ELAP's action to take. I mean, at that point, their annual proficiency testing should be complete and submitted, so that part is on the laboratory to make sure they're in compliance.
Yeah, no, if they're just waiting to hear back, I mean, and even if it's the day before and they still haven't heard anything, I mean, they basically don't want to get caught in the,
Right.
wait, it expired, but it was interim and I was told I didn't have to do anything. And so I just want to make sure that at what point do they need to act to you if they have not heard from you?
So typically, they will hear from us by that point, but
Okay.
they can always reach out, yeah, if it's like the day before, then I would say.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. I will pass that on, or they're probably listening, so, yeah.
All right, and one last thing before I do make the motion to adjourn is just a reminder that Kate had sent out probably 3 months ago information to people in terms of terms for ELTAC membership and so on. So if you've not responded to her with your wishes, desires, etc.
Yeah, I think I was thinking of doing some follow-up on that, just because our next meeting will probably be March-ish, which is when almost everyone's 2-year in this room, 2-year term is up. So we'll have to kind of think about strategy and then get back to you all, and try to figure out whose intentions are to stay and who is, maybe not in a position where they can continue on, so.
Commitments as soon as possible on that are going to be pretty key, where they can make a commitment, because replacing folks doesn't come quickly, I'm assuming.
And I anticipate if they don't, or if you're not able to stay, then March would probably be your last meeting, and we would look to replace you before the second meeting in 2018.
Got it.
Jacob.
I just want to say whatever you did today, Kate, with the communications was great. No hiccups. We could hear everybody, and good job.
Well, that's really setting the bar high there for the.
We haven't heard from Southern California for about a half hour, so we're assuming that they're actually still connected.
They adjourned at 3. They saw that on the agenda.
We're still here.
And we are indeed impressed with the fact that there were absolutely no breakups in communication.
Yeah.
There might have been a few times we wanted some, but, so, all right, with that.
One more thing.
Oh,
Yeah, so I just wanted to tell Andy, thank you very much for chairing the inaugural new revamped LTAC, and that you were a pleasure to work with. You had that collaborative spirit, and you helped, what did you say, herd the cats?
I did use that term.
And it was a pleasure working with you, and thank you very much.
Yeah, well done, Ann.
I couldn't have done it without a group of very committed people, especially that first year. All right, with that, we will adjourn.
Do you need a motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn.
All right, yeah, we need a motion to adjourn, and you just did.
There we go, boom, done.
We are adjourned.
Recommendation. We made it today, but.
You needed another set of eyes here.
I was harassing him, he was getting so.
We will. I'll give you a shout. I've been very close. About 20 or 18.